Today's daf is Chulin daf Kuf Tez Zayin, and we are in the middle of the Amid on daf Kuf Tez Zayin Amid Aleph, the two dots. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayev v'Oif v'Chulu. Today's daf is being learned Le'ilu Nishmas Chayim Elazar Shalom ben Tovia Gedalia and Chava Fega Bas Reb Shmaya. So we're moving along in Parakal Abasar, dealing with halachos related to the laws of Basar v'Chalav. Specifically, the Mishnah had discussed the fact that it says in the Torah, the Issa Basar v'Chalav, not once, not twice, but thrice. 3 times it says in the Torah, Lo yisavashel gedi b'chalev imay. Chazal, as we saw in the last few dafin, made a very big deal about the fact that it says Lo yisavashel gedi b'chalev imay 3 times, and Chazal darshed in many drashas. Number 1, the fact that the Iker Azar is mentioned 3 times, Chazal said, means that there are 3 different azaras. There's an azara that says you're not allowed to cook basar v'chalav. There's an azara that says you're not allowed to eat basar v'chalav. And there's an azara that says that you're not allowed to have hana from basar v'chalav. But in addition to the Iker Azara being mentioned 3 times, it also says Gedi 3 times, Bachalev Imoy 3 times. And Chazal understood that there are drushes al gabe drushes to be had. Meaning, the Torah could have mentioned Basar v'Chalav 3 times, but not emphasize the Gedi all 3 times, and not emphasize the B'chalev Imay all 3 times. And it's for that reason Chazal said that you can't just learn from here 3 azaras, but there are additional limudim, ribuyim and miyutim to be had. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva, the great Rabbi Akiva, was mentioned, and his opinion was that from the fact that the Torah said 3 times, Lo yisavashel gedi, we learned 3 miyutim. Gedi is mema'et, that there's no iser basar v'chalav da'iraisa with a chaya, meaning Gedi, as we saw in the Gemara, means not only a goat, but it means all behemos, but not chayos. Additionally, Gedi means not oifos, and then finally Gedi is a kosher behema, and therefore we're mema'et from there, any behema tmeya, a bit behema that's not going to be kosher. So according to Rabbi Akiva, the 3 mentions of Gedi are Chad Lamute Chaya, Chad Lamute Yoif, and the other one is Lamute Behema Tmei. If you remember, on Daf Kuf Yudalid Amid Beis, the Gemara brought the drasha of Shmuel, the Amir Shmuel, who said that from the fact that it says 3 times the word Gedi, we learn 6 halachas. The Gemara said 6 halachas. How could it be 6 halachas? And after further review, the Gemara edited, and the Gemara said that really it's not 6, but depending on which one of the Ibayasemas of the Gemara you want to go with, either 2 halachas are learned from there, or 3 halachas are learned from there. What were the halachas? Number 1, Chad l'rabbi says hashlil. One is coming to be marba, that the basar of an uber is considered basar. It's included in the laws of basar v'chalav. So Gedi in Shmuel's world is a riboy, and it's marba, a baby Gedi, a fetus Gedi, that it's going to be included. Chad l'me'ute behema tmeya. One's coming to be my behema tmeya, and in one of the ibayasemas, there's 3 drushes to be had, not 2. The other one would be coming to be marba, that there's an issa basar v'chalav with regards to the chelev of the animal, and additionally with the halachas of a nevela animal, and kamash malan, even though really ein isser chalal isser, but over here isser chalal isser, and therefore you can have an issa basar v'chalav even regarding basar, which is already yasser. The Gemara is going to begin with a very obvious question, and that is, at first glance, Rabbi Akiva's 3 drushes in the Mishnah don't stem with the maskana of Shmuel's 2, or let's go with 3 drushes that he had in the Gemara. Rabbi Akiva's 3 drushes are Chad l'me'ute chaya, Chad l'me'ute oif, v'chad l'me'ute behema tmeya. Shmuel's are Chad l'rabbis chelev and avela, that we say is a chalal iser, Chad l'rabbis es ashlil, and only one of them actually are the same, Chad l'me'ute behema tmeya. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva emir chayv oif v'chulu, hani ha'afkinu, look at this Shmuel. Don't we already need these gdis for the way Shmuel presented it? So how then could you make Rabbi Akiva shtim with Shmuel? Now it's interesting. You would think if Rabbi Akiva said it one way and Shmuel said it the other way, we'd be trying to make Shmuel shtim with Rabbi Akiva. But the Gemara presents it as, how do we make Rabbi Akiva shtim with Shmuel? Says the Gemara, because of Rabbi Akiva, Pshan Rabbi Akiva must be that he holds Issa Chalal Issa. And if that's the case, chelev umesa, as it relates to the chelev of the behema, or a mesa as in an avela, they don't really require a pasuk. If that's the case, one of the three gedis that Shmuel already used his three gedis for are not necessary. Additionally, shlil gedi ma'alyo. Kubri Rabbi Akiva holds that the shlil, the fetus of an animal, is just an animal. And if that's the case, if the Torah says you're not allowed to eat basar v'chalav, the basar of a shlil will be included in that. And if that's the case, I don't need that either. Well, then two of Shmuel's three usages of Gedi in Rabbi Akiva's world are not necessary. So then they're left over. What are they left for? Prat l'chaya v'oif v'lebehema tmei. The behema tmei is one of the three that Shmuel used his for. The other two are going to be chaya v'oif. In other words, the maskana, we have two drachim in terms of how to darshan these three Gedis, Rabbi Akiva and Shmuel. Interesting. According to Rabbi Akiva, one's coming to be made a chaya, one's coming to be made an oif, and one's coming to be made a behema tmeya. According to Shmuel, one is coming to be marba, chelev and avela. The other is coming to be marba, a shlil. The third one, he concurs with Rabbi Akiva. It's coming to be mima'et. It's coming to be mima'et a behema tmeya. What's that stake in terms of seeing it Rabbi Akiva's way or seeing it as Shmuel's way? Number one, a global shaila of, do you hold in Kala Torah Kula Issachal Alis or Ein Issachal Alis? Rabbi Akiva holds Issachal Alis, so I don't need a pasuk to be marba the nevela and chelev. Shmuel is going according to the shittas Ein Issachal Alis, hence I do need a riboy for chelev and nevela. The other shaila that's at stake is, do we look at a fetus as basar as being good old-fashioned basar? If we do, then why would I need a pasuk to be marbit? If we don't, that would explain why I do need a pasuk to be marbit. Either way, going back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, after it brought the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, it mentioned Rabbi Yosei Haglili. Rabbi Yosei Haglili had said, so the third time it says in the Torah is in Parashas Rei. It's in the same pasuk that mentions and we learn from there that anything that's included in the Issa Nevela is included in the Issa Basa V'chalav. If that's the case, said Rabbi Yosei Haglili, you would think it should be included in this Basa V'chalav as well. So at face value, what Rabbi Yosei Haglili is coming to say is that oif is going to be excluded from the Isser Basa V'chalav, because even though it's included in the Isser Nevela, and it sounds like the Geder of Basar as it relates to Basa V'chalav is, are you included in Isser Nevela or are you not included? But being that it says V'chalev Imai and the oif's mother doesn't have milk, so it's for that reason it's going to be excluded. But the truth is, and we spoke about this when we went through the Mishnah, there's another thing Rabbi Yosei Haglili is coming to say, and that is that anything that's Asam Yisham Nevela is included in the Issa Basa V'chalav with the exception of Oif. That means that not only is a behema included in the Issa Basa V'chalav, but a Chaya is also included in the Issa Basa V'chalav. So the Torah says Lo Yisavashal Gedi, and Gedi we know from the Gemara in Daf Kufiyad Gimel means all behemas. What about Chaya v'Oif? So Rabbi Yosei Haglili is essentially saying that Chaya is included, because if it's included in Nevela, it's included in Basa V'chalav. Well, Chaya is included in Nevela. Oif, even though it's included in Nevela, is excluded because of V'chalev Imai. So really, Rabbi Yosei Haglili's shita is that Basa V'chalav Midei includes Behema and Chaya, it excludes Oif. That is the loik Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva, as we just mentioned, learns from the three gedis, chad lamutei chaya, chad lamutei oif, chad lamutei beimitmei. But as it relates to chaya v'oif, Shitas Rabbi Akiva is that sai chaya and sai oif are not included in Basa V'chalav Deiraisa. Shitas Rabbi Yosei Haglili is, chaya is, oif is not. So it's machloikas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosei Haglili, whether basar chaya B'chalav, is that an Issa Deiraisa or is that not an Issa Deiraisa? We mentioned also when we learned the Mishnah that really there was a Tanakama that was quoted in the Mishnah. Tanakama was talking about what happens if you cook basa v'chalav, where either the basa behema was from a behema tmeya or the chalav came from a behema tmeya. And Tanakama shita is that the halacha is that you need them both to be tahira. And if one of them are tmeya, that's going to be enough of a reason for there not to be an Issa Basa V'chalav Deiraisa. Didn't say a word about Chaya, didn't say a word about Oif. And it's for that reason, what seemed is that the Tanakama Shita is that the Issa Basa V'chalav Deiraisa is true, Sai for a Behema, but but also for a chaya and for a knife. It's only Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili who come after the Tanakam and the Mishnah. They're the ones that are getting involved in being Memayit Chaya v'Oif, and it's only them that Chaya and Oif are going to be excluded. And if that's the case, really we have three shittas in the Mishnah. The shita of the Tanakam who never got involved in this, but from him not getting involved, we can imply his shita, and that is that the Isabas v'Chalv Deiraisa is Saifa Behema, Saifa Chaya, Saifa Oif. Rabbi Akiva's shita is Isabas v'Chalv is only for a Behema, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili's shita is that Isabas v'Chalav is for a behema and for a chaya. Three very distinct shitas. Either way, the Gemara now is going to go through a little bit of what it is that we just set up. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Omer Nema lo yisoichlu v'chulu. My ikabein Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Akiva. What is the nafkamina between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva? So again, Rabbi Akiva darshan gedi. One's coming to be ma'it chaya, one's coming to be ma'it oif, and one's coming to ma'it behem b'tameh. Rabbi Yossi Aglili had a different formulation. It says nevela and leisav actually chalev ima in the same pasuk. From the juxtaposition, we learn anything that's included in nevela is included in basav v'chalav, with the exception of oif, because there's a miyat of chalev ima. So what's the difference? Now we know what the difference is. We just mentioned it. The difference between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva is oif, and that's exactly what the Gemara. It's chaya, and that's exactly what the Gemara says. Ikebeinayu chaya. Nafkamina is the basra of a chaya. Rabbi Yossi Aglili savar. Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds chaya deiraisa. Chaya is deiraisa because being that it's included in nevela, it's included in bishul basar v'chalav, and he never got involved in gedi. Rabbi Akiva savar chaya the Rabbanon. Rabbi Akiva holds that chaya is only awesome with the Rabbanon because one of the gedis is memayit chaya. Iba Yisema says the Gemara. Oif ikebeinayu. Or you could say the nafkamina is not only chaya, but the nafkamina is oif as well. And this is important. Only was the key word there. Even in the Iba Yisema, chaya is an nafkamina. There's no other way to learn the machloikis, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Akiva with a little bit of avana without coming to the obvious conclusion that they're arguing in chaya. Rabbi Akiva was explicitly memayit chaya. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says if you include it in a vela, you're going to be included in basav v'chalav. Chaya is included in a vela. Kosher chaya, you're not allowed to eat even bin a vela. So if that's the case, so obviously it's included in basav v'chalav. What the Iba Yisema is saying is that in addition to chaya being a nafkamina, there's a nafkamina with oif as well. How so? Rabbi Akiva holds chaya v'oif eina min ha'Torah aber hamidrabanan asiri. Rabbi Yossi Aglili savar. Rabbi Yossi Aglili shita is oif afilu midrabanan nami lo yaser. So in the Iba Yisema there's an afkamina and oif as well, not on a doiraisa level, meaning not on a drasha level, but on a derabanan level. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, in as much as gedi is memayit chaya v'oif, but it's only midraisa. Midrabanan Rabbi Akiva is moeded as an iser basav v'chal by a chaya and an oif. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, when he was memayit oif, he was memayit midraisa, and he never even included it in the Issa D'Rabbanan. So there happens to be, according to Iba Yisema, a nafkamina ben Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, even midrabanan. Now again, it doesn't go to the core of the Mishnah because the Mishnah was handling the drushes. So as it relates to the drushes, there's no nafkamina. Sai Rabbi Akiva, Sai Rabbi Yossi Aglili were memayit oif. Nafkamina is if we're memayit chaya. That's the first mahalach in the Gemara. Ikebeinayu chaya. The Iba Yisrael is saying that you should just know parenthetically there is a nafkamina in oif as well. Because Rabbi Akiva was memayit oif, but he included it in the Issa D'Rabbanan abasav v'chalav. The Rabbanan, when they expanded on the Issa, they expanded it to oif as well. Chicken and cheese is something that's also according to Rabbi Akiva midrabbanan. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you're allowed to eat chicken, have a coffee with it. There's no Issa Midairaisa, there's no Issa Midrabanan as well. Sounds like a little bit of a chiddush. The Gemara says it's actually mefurish in the Brisa. Tanya Nami Yochi, Bem Koimish Rabbi Eliezer, in the world of Rabbi Eliezer, Hayu Karsen Eitzim, Lasais Bechamim, they would cut wood to make coals, Lasais Barzel to make Barzel. This is based on Rabbi Eliezer Shita, who holds that Mila, which is Deicha Shabbos, doesn't just mean Mila's Deicha Shabbos, but Machshire Mila's Deicha Shabbos as well. So Rabbi Eliezer had a Shita that you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos to make the Izemel, to make the knife, the barzel to be able to go ahead now and to do a bris milah. According to the Chachamim, the actual milah is Deicha Shabbos, but the machshire milah is not going to be Deicha Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer held not that way, and this Brisa says that being Rabbi Eliezer not that way, his chassidim, the people that lived in his Makim, his zip code that followed his halachas, they actually used to do it. Additionally, and this is the part of the Brisa we need, they used to eat basar oif v'chalav. Why? Because basically holds there's no issa basar oif v'chalav. But if he holds it's asa midrabanan, so how could they have done it? The teretz is because he held it's mutter midairaisa, and he held that it's mutter midrabanan as well. The Gemara tells a story on this note. Levi iklu be Yosef Rishba. Levi once came to the house of Yosef the hunter. So Yosef Rishba used to know how to catch birds, and Levi was once by him. So you figure if you're having dinner by Yosef Rishba, you're probably going to get a pretty cool oif dinner. So they brought to him Reisha, the head, the tavasa of some sort of exotic bird, kosher obviously, bechalava, and they served it to him together with milk. And Yosef Rishba or Levi didn't say a word. When Levi came to Rebbe and he told him over the Maisa, so Rebbe told him, he said, you should have put him in Cherem. Levi, if you saw Yosef Rishba engaging in Basa v'chalav, you should have done something about it. Had you not do anything about it, so the Gemara says that Levi told Rebbe, I'll be honest with you, this was a city with the people that lived there followed the laws of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira had some unique halachos, and I know they used to follow him. I was down the kafschos. I said to myself, Dorash Lohuk Rabbi Yosei Aglili, that maybe Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira holds like Rabbi Yosei Aglili. And not only is it not awesome Raisa, it's not even awesome Rabbanan. And for that reason, I didn't say a word. Because in my mind, Rabbi Yosei Haglili is such a shita, and even though I wasn't in his makom, I was in Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira's makom, but maybe Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira held like him. I knew I was in a place where they had unique minhagim and halachos, and it's for that reason I assumed that maybe that's what was going on, and that's why I didn't say a word. This is an anecdote that follows what the Brais had previously said, that which was a Tanya Namiyachi to the Iba Yisem in the Gemara. That, as relates to the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosei Haglili, there's not just one nafkamina as it relates to chaya, but there's a nafkamina as it relates to oif as well. So again, just to do a final sikum on this machlokes in the Mishnah, we have three shitas: the Tanakama shita, the basa behema, basa chay, basa oif are all awesome midday rice to eat together with chalav. Rabbi Akiva shita, it's only behema, not chay v'oif. Rabbi Yosei Haglili shita, it's behema and chaya, not oif. My ikka bein Rabbi Yosei Haglili and Rabbi Akiva. Ikka beinayu number one chaya. That's easy. And this seems to be a shaila in the Gemara. Machlokes between the first teretz of the Gemara and the second teretz of the Gemara. Could be batzer oifis and nafkamina as well. Didn't they both say oif is excluded? Yeah. Midei raisa, the taka is no nafkamina. Nafkamina would be midei rabbanan. And by the way, that Iba Yisema is very much supported. It's supported with the Tanya Nami Hachi, a Mefurish Abraisa, Ben Koimoch, Rabbi Yosei Haglili, Haya Oichlem Basar Oif Bechalav. You see from there that not only is this not Asar Midei Raisa, but it's not Asar Midei Rabbanon either. Either way, moving along, another Mishnah. Kevas Oiveit Koichavim V'Shel Nevela Harezu Asura. So the Mishnah is talking about a case where an animal was shachat, or an animal was found dead. And inside the keva, one of the four stomachs, the abomasum of the animal, they found milk. So this was milk that the animal had obviously digested. And at this point, the milk, it's still viable, was inside the keva of the animal. And the question is, how do we view lahalacha this milk? So it says the Mishnah, this is the opening line, that the kevas, which is that milk of a behemoth that belongs to an Oivei Kechavim, or a behemoth that's in Avela, is going to be aser. And the reason is because we look at the milk as being part and parcel of the basar of the animal, and being that the basar of an Oivei Kechavim and the basar of Nevela are both aser b'achila, right? Oivei Kechavim is Nevela. So basar, Oivei Kechavim, and basar Nevela are essentially both Nevela. The basar is aser. It's for that reason this milk that's inside of it is going to be aser as well. And of course, the chiddush is that even if the milk itself, the origin of the milk, we know was kosher milk, but once it's considered kevas, Oivei Kechavim, Mishal Nevela, it was found there. At that point, we look at it as basar, not as chalav, and therefore, basar Nevela, basar Oivei Kechavim is aser. This milk is going to be aser as well. Another halacha says the Mishnah, Hamaimid ba'ar shal keva. In the event that somebody was maimid, somebody made cheese using the ar of a keva, of a kosher abomasum, the halacha is im yesh b'benoisen tam. If the keva that was used to be maimid the chalav, to make the gvina, was enough to be nois and tam into the gvina, harezu asura, then the halach is it's going to be asa, because it's going to be basa v'chalav. Now, it's only basa v'chalav d'Rabbanan, right? It wasn't derech pishul, but it's going to be asa. If it's not nois and tam, then obviously it's not going to be a problem. Now, the background to this line of Gemara is something that we know already. specifically from the Coca-Cola raid, right? But this is something we know already, and that is that once upon a time, the way they used to make cheese is they would take a little bit of the oil of a keva, they would put it inside, and that's the way the milk would convert into the solid, it would turn into gvina. So the oil of the keva had certain enzymes that would emit into the chalav, and it had this quality, this ability to be maimed, and that's literally the way they used to make gvina. Now, we spoke about this in the past, Sugya Arucha Masechtas Avodah Zarah, that Shmuel Shita is, and we'll see Shmuel actually later in today's daf, Shmuel Shita is that the reason gvinas akum is aser is because the Ovdei Kechavim used to use their keva, the oil of their non-kosher animals, which meant that there was some blias over here of non-kosher, and it's for that reason was a problem. It shouldn't always be an issue, because shouldn't we assume maybe there's bittul, right? If yesh baba nice and time, it should be a problem. Not if it's not nice and time, so that of course ushered in the famous Rajba, and that was the whole Coca-Cola Part 1 raid bite. But the bottom line is that there was a metzias that the way chalav converted to gvina was by using the oil of a keva. Therefore, gvina sakim. They're using the keva of a nevela, ostensibly. It's for that reason it's gvina. But our Mishnah is not even talking about nevela. Our Mishnah says that if somebody goes ahead and he makes gvina by taking the oil of a keva kshera, so there, what's it tali in? Well, it's tali if it's nice and tam. If it's nice and tam, it's going to be aser. If it's not nice and tam, it's going to be mutter. And why would it be aser if it's nice and tam? Not because the nevela. The reason it would be aser is because of basav v'chalv. Another halacha says the Mishnah kshera sheyankim inat treifa. If you have a behemoth kshera that was yonik in nursed milk from an animal, that's a treifa. So the halacha is kevasa asura. Any chalav that's found inside the keva is going to be aser. And the reason is because being that the chalav came from a treifa and kol hayotzim so the chalav initially was aser, even though right now it's inside the keva of the kosher animal. We look at where it came from; it's going to be aser. What about the flip side? Treifa sheyanka min akshera. What would be if a treifa was yonik from akshera? Kevasa muteres. So there, any milk that's found inside is going to be mutter, because even though the animal itself is a treifa, but being that it was yonka min akshera, we look at it as being kosher. And the reason is because we say it's just kanas there; doesn't become part of the basar, and it's for that reason it's going to be okay. So let's just do a quick recap on the Mishnah. Mishnah, if you think about it, said 3 halachas, and as we'll see, 2 of them blatantly contradict each other. The first halacha of the Mishnah was so you have an animal of an oivik kechavim, an animal of an avela, and there's milk inside the keva, it's aser. Even if the origin of the milk is kosher milk, because once it's inside the stomach of the animal, it takes on basar. The basar of a behemoth of Yechavim and Nevela is not something you're allowed to eat, so therefore the chalav is not something you're allowed to eat either. First halacha. Second halacha is, if somebody is maimid, he creates gvina using the oil of a cave of a kosher animal, if it's nice and tam, it's a problem. It's not nice and tam, there's no issur basav v'chalav. The third halacha of the Mishnah is, what would be if you have a kosher animal that was yonik from a treifa, or a treifa animal that was yonik kosher milk? So what do we look at? We look at the origin of the milk. A kshera sheyankim in that treifa, the milk inside the cave is going to be aser. A treifa sheyankim in that kshera, it's going to be mutter, because you don't look at the milk as being part of the animal. Says the Mishnah. So again, 3 halachas, and we said 2 of them contradict each other. Which 2 contradict each other? It's easy. It's the first and the third. The first halacha of the Mishnah was kevas oivek kechavim v'shal nevela harezu asura. What does that mean? That if there's milk inside the keva of the non-kosher animal, we treat it like the basar of the non-kosher animal, and it's aser. We don't care the origin of the milk is kosher. We look at where the milk is right now. The third halacha of the Mishnah was just the opposite. Ksheira sheyankim in atreifa asura, a betreifa sheyankim in akshera. This case muteres. What do you mean? Right now, it's inside the stomach of a treifa. I don't care, because it was Yankim and Akshera, and it's for that reason it's going to be okay. At first glance, the first halacha and the third halacha of the Mishnah contradict each other. This is something that the Gemara is going to address. But before the Gemara addresses that, the Gemara addresses something else, and that is Mineu Bei, the first line of the Mishnah. So again, there's a stira between the first halacha of the Mishnah and the third halacha of the Mishnah. But before we ask stiras, it'd be helpful to understand the first halacha of the Mishnah. And there is something that requires beer, which we would have to figure out first before we try understanding how this does or doesn't shem with something else. So what was the first halacha of the Mishnah? Kevas oived kechavim v'shel nevela harezu asura. Pretty straightforward. Says the Gemara, no. Atu kevas oivik echavim lav neveli. What's the definition of kevas oivik echavim? Sounds like the keva of an animal that belongs to an oivik echavim. Now, I don't care that it belongs to an oivik echavim. What it must mean is that it was slaughtered by an oivik echavim, right? It could belong to an oivik echavim, but be kosher. And if the shechita was done by haimashayid, everything's going to be okay. The teretz is oivik echavim means it was shachet by an oivik echavim, which is the same as nevela. So essentially, the Mishnah just repeated itself. Kevas oivik echavim v'shal nevela. Just say kevas nevela. What's the halach of kevas oivik echavim? It's a Mishnah. Le'il daf yud gimel amid aleph shchitas oivik echavim. We know nevela. So why even mention kevas oivik echavim? Makes no sense. Just tell me the keva of a nevela is not kosher. Kevas oivik echavim v'shal nevela. Kevas oivik echavim is just an example of nevela. I could give you 100 examples of nevela. So why mention kevas oivik echavim? Atu kevas oivik echavim lav nevela. And we'll see the Gemara is going to say two terutzim. The first is Rav Huna. The second one is Shmuel. Rav Huna hacha b'leikech dimin oivik echavim askinan. We're talking about where in the case of kevas oivik echavim, a yid was the one that shechted it. So why is it kevas oivik echavim? Because a yid bought the animal from a guy. Okay, so then what's the problem? It should be mutter. Because we're concerned that maybe this animal was yonik min atreifa, because at the end of the day you bought it from a guy. A yid would be careful that his animal shouldn't be yonik from a treifa, but the guy's not careful. So we're worried that maybe he was yonik from a treifa, and it's for that reason it's going to be aser. So kevas nevela is aser because of the fact that right now it's in the basar of an nevela. Kevas oivik echavim is also for a whole different reason. It's also because we're worried that the origin of the milk came from a treifa. Not because right now it's in a non-kosher animal, it's not. Kevas oivik echavim doesn't mean nevela. It means something else. It means that it was bought from a guy, and it's also because of the origin. So really, these two halachas are not saying the same thing. Kevas oivik echavim is also even if the animal is kosher because of we're concerned of the origin. The shal nevela is also because it's sitting in the nevela, so therefore it's part of the basar of the nevela. It's for that reason it's going to be best. But the Gemara asks, is that something that we're really concerned about? We're worried that if you go ahead and you buy chalav from a guy or an animal from a guy that maybe it came from a treifa, Tanya will into the brayso, you're allowed to buy eggs from an oivik echavim, and we're not concerned. We're not worried that maybe this beitza came from an avela, which would make it aser, or came from a treifa. Now, obviously, we're concerned on treifa. So here you're telling me that if somebody buys an animal from an oivik echavim, then he shechs it and there's milk inside. Maybe it came from a treifa, therefore it's going to be us. And that's what the Mishnah means when it says kevas oivik echavim l'chura. You see mefurish that you're allowed to buy beitzim from an oivik echavim, and we're not chayish mishum treifa. Mar says ela im chayishinu shem yanok benat tmei. You're right. When talking about chayish treifa, what we're chayish is tmeya. Maybe it nursed from a non-kosher animal, and it's the same point that at the end of the day, the milk might be non-kosher milk. But the Gemara says, we just proved from the fact that you're allowed to buy beitzim from a oivik echavim that we're not worried about treifa. So if you're not worried about treifa and you're maskim in the Mishnah, that's not the concern. So why would we be worried about tmeya? Maishna treifa the loy chayshin ma'ichem pei the chayshin. The Gemara says very simple. Treifa loy shchicha tmei shchicha. We know roiv animals are not treifas, right? Underpins the Omesechtes Chulin. So it's true by Yidden, it's true by non-Yidden as well. So we're not chayish for a treifa because loy chayshin. But behemoth tmei is shchicha. But the Gemara says is shchicha. I feel like Abdi don nechash. If you're telling me that to have a behemoth tmei is shchicha, so why are you allowed to even go ahead and eat the keva from an animal that you shechted that you bought from a yid? Why are you not worried that the yid's animal also was yonik chalav tmeya? Not treif, because that's like shchiach, but maybe chalav tmeya. So Gemara gives the obvious answer. Anan yidin the badlina binaya. We're people that are mavdal ourselves. We distance ourselves from non-kosher animals. So and if we see a non-kosher animal anywhere near our animals, we're going to quickly be mafresh it. We're going to get rid of it. It's like Gazrabu, Rabbanan, you have to be worried that don't eat the keva that's inside, because you're worried it came from a behemoth tmeya. A Jew wouldn't let a behemoth tmeya come within 100 feet of his herd. The non-Jews, they're not mavdal themselves from these non-kosher animals. And if they see that a non-kosher animal is mingling amongst his animals, he won't be mafresh because the Rabbanan fell, you should be guys. But the bottom line is, Rav Huna is the first teretz in terms of understanding the Mishnah. Kevas oivik echavim shal nevela reizu asura. Isn't oivik echavim just an example of a nevela? So why would you even mention it? The Teretz says no. We're saying two things. Kevas oivik chavim is aser, and kevas nevela is aser. And by the way, it's not for the same reason. Kevas oivik chavim is aser. It's talking about when you bought the behemoth for an oivik chavim, and you're concerned that maybe it was yoinik from chalav tmeya, not treifa, because that one I'm chayish for, but chalav tmeya, and it's for that reason we're worried that the origin of this milk is from something non-kosher. Vishal nevela means where it's a real nevela. There, the chalav is going to be aser because we look at the chalav as being basar. If we look at it as being basar, that's a reason that it would be not okay. Either way, that is the first teretz of the Gemara. Shmuel is the second malach. He said chadik tani. The way you read the Mishnah is that it's saying, well, it's not saying two things, two different timing, but we have to do a dot of surgery in the Mishnah. And this is the way you read it. Keva shchitas oivek chavim nevela and almost not harezu asura v'hi asura. So the Mishnah is talking about the keva of an Novik Echavim. Talk about the cave of an animal that was shachet by a Novik Echavim. It happens to be it's in a Vela, and it's for that reason it's going to be awesome. So, again, it's still a little funny, according to Shmuel, why would the Mishnah talk about the cave of an animal that was slaughtered by a Novik Echavim, as opposed to just talk about the cave of a Nevela? True. Isn't Shchita Novik Echavim just an example of Nevela, per the Mishnah, little daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph? But at the end of the day, it's not redundant. It's not wordy. It's not like you're mentioning the klal and then one prat. You're just saying one thing. That kevas shchitas oivik echavim is in avela, and it's for that reason he asur it's going to be asa. But the Gemara asks a kasha on Shmuel. Umi amar Shmuel hachi. Does Shmuel really hold that if there's milk found inside the keva of an avela, it's going to be us? Now, how do you know Shmuel holds that? Because Shmuel is just mefarish the Mishnah that way. Shmuel himself said, why is it that the gvina of an ovik chavim is aser? Why is it that you're not allowed to buy gvinas akum? We mentioned it a minute ago. It's because we're worried there's a little bit of the of the kevas veil that was put inside. It's nois and tam, and it's for that reason it's going to be a problem. Says the Gemara, you see that Shmuel held that the only reason you're not allowed to buy gvinas ovik chavim is because you're worried they take a little bit of keva and they put it into the chalav. Hakeva, gufa sharia. But you see that the chalav that's found inside the keva itself, that doesn't bother me. Because if you're worried about the chalav that's found inside the keva, then why do you have to come on to the fact that they're maimed it with our kevis nevela? You're saying good, say better. Tell me that the chalav itself might have originated from the keva. I mean that chalav is for sure a problem. So therefore, gvinas akim should always be an issue. From the fact that we don't say that, but rather Shmuel said it's because of a different chash that they put a little bit of the oil kevas nevela inside. Isn't that a raya that he must hold that kevas nevela is really mutter? So if that's the case, freit the Gemara kasha mi amar Shmuel hachi. That what? That chadik tani kevas shchitas ovik chavim nevela v'hi asura. Shmuel himself said that gvinas akim is only asa because they take a little bit of oil kevas nevela and they put it inside hakeva gufa shaya. So there's two things just in terms of clarifying that I think are worth mentioning. Number one, kevas nevela and mepnei shemamida noisei ba'or kevas nevela is not the same thing, right? In the Mishnah we saw it's two things, but I just think it's worth for clarity in the Gemara to chazah this over. Again, stating the obvious. Means that you have chalav and it's in a vat somewhere and you're converting it into gvina. One of the ingredients that I use is they take a little bit of the skin of the keva and they put it inside. Assuming it comes from a nevela, there's a little bit of nevela inside. Hence you have yourself a problem. Hashtag Coca-Cola, right? That's basically what's going on over here. That's mamida noise ba'or kevas nevela. Kevas nevela means milk that was found inside the actual keva. Two different things. Not you're taking a little bit of the cave and you're putting it into the milk, but the milk that was actually found inside the cave. Shmuel said that the reason gvinas akim is aser is because the goyim, like the Jews, use a little bit of keva to make their gvina. Right? We saw in the Mishnah. That's the halacha. That was the second case of our Mishnah. Right? The second halacha of the Mishnah was ma'imid ba'ar shel keva, talking about a kosher animal. Im yesh b'noisem tamarezu asura. That's the way they used to make gvina. So the goyim did the same thing. The problem is when we do it, we're using kosher meat. When they use it, they're using non-kosher meat. And as a result, that's why Chazal said that gvinas akim is going to be awesome. The Gemara's taina is that why do you have to come on to the fact that there's kevis nevela inside? There's a more obvious reason that this should be aser, and that is because maybe the guy is using the chalav of the keva, and being that chalav that's inside the keva is a problem, so maybe this Gvina should be dead on arrival because maybe it came from that chalav. The Gemara is implying from there that Shmuel must hold that chalav that's found inside the cave is not an issue. The problem is Shmuel was mefarish our Mishnah. That it really it is issue. By the way, why is Gvinas Akum not usher anyways? Because it's chalav akum. So again, we mentioned this in the Coca-Cola Rabbi. But why is Gvinas Akum anyways not usher? Just because of good old-fashioned chalav akum. Chalav akum we know is usher, so let Gvinas Akum be usher as well. So we know the answer. The answer is because you can't make Gvina from non-kosher milk. So we know for sure that the origin of the milk has to be kosher. So there is a chalav akum, which is based on maybe it's chalav from a non-kosher animal. That's not applicable to the shmuz of Gvinas Akum. Gvinas Akum, we know the milk must be kosher. So if the milk is kosher, it should be kosher. So Shmuel said, it's because of the oil of the cave that's put inside. Tainas the Gemara have a better reason. It could be it's kosher milk. The milk came from a cow, but once it made it into the cave of the non-kosher animal, it got a din nevela, and that's why it should be a problem. So why does Shmuel need mipnei shemamidin oisei ba'or kavis nevela? Typically, because maybe it's the chalav that's in the cave itself. What's known as the keva, right? Kevas soivikechav and kevas nevela. And Shmuel, we know holds it's a problem because Shmuel was mefarish in the Mishnah that way. So the Gemara kasha and Shmuel. The second ha'ara that needs to be mentioned in this tais kasha, and that is, so you're asking a steer in Shmuel. What's the first Shmuel? Shmuel was mefarish a Mishnah. It's not a steer in Shmuel. It's if anything, it's a kasha. How does Shmuel's halacha of mipnei ma'asur gvinas oivd kecham neish mamidas bekevis nevel shtim with our Mishnah? Shmuel in our sugya is just being mefarish a Mishnah. So it's a steer Shmuel, it sounds fancy, but really it's not so much a steer Shmuel as much you have a kasha on Yena Shmuel and Avodah Zarah. The sugya Gvinas Akum has to do with the Mishnah. So that's this kasha. And Tosfos speaks out, "Belav hochi having motzi lemifrach mi masnisen al Shmuel elah adifale the midim mefarish Shmuel masnisen al masavik. I mean, there could have always been an answer that maybe Shmuel didn't hold like the Mishnah, maybe Shmuel had a Tana that didn't learn that way. But if Shmuel was mefarish the Mishnah, he probably holds like the Mishnah. So at the end of the day, how are these two Shmuels going to stem? But the bottom line is, this is the kasha. From the way Shmuel was mefarish on Mishnah, you see, he holds like the halacha of the Mishnah that if you find milk inside the keva of a nevela, the halacha is as a din nevela. If that's the case, why would Shmuel have said that Gvinas Akum is also because they took oil of the kevas nevela and they put it into the milk? L'churi should have said because the milk that's inside the keva, that in and of itself is already a problem. The Gemara says like kasha. I don't think it's a kasha because I could always tell you kan koydem chazara, kan la'acha chazara. So what does this mean? So really the background to this is a Gemara. It's a Gemara in Mesechtes Avodah Zarah Daf Chav Tes on the base. It's this general sugya of Gvinos Akum. The Gemara over there brings that Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua this kasha. So again, this kasha that Shmuel was discussing and Uda Amiram discussed in Mesechtes Avodah Zarah, Rabbi Yishmael himself asked this kasha to Rabbi Yeshua. He asked him, why is it that Gvinas Akum is asur? At the end of the day, the Issachal of Akum doesn't apply to Gvina because you can't make Gvina from non-kosher milk. So, Mipnei ma asru chachamim Gvinas oivik. Now, there was a long shakla. The initial attempt of Rabbi Yeshua to explain the issue was, he said it's because of the chalav that's korish inside the keva, and that chalav has a din of nevela, and it's for that reason it's going to be an issue. Rabbi Shmuel Lamaisa was doichet. Rabbi Shmuel told him that I know that chalav doesn't mamash have a din nevela, and his raya that doesn't have a din nevela is because the halach is that the kaihanim were allowed to eat chalav that was found inside the cave of the carbon oil. Now the carbon oil is kulei kalav. If the chalav of the keva always has a din of the basar, then it should have been treated like oila and oila basar. You're not allowed to eat. So for the fact that the kain's allowed to eat it, it's for that reason he said it's going to be okay. The bottom line is Rabbi Shua initially gave this answer. He said that could be the reason Gvinas Akum is aser is because the chalav that's in the keva is considered keva, and we're worried you're using that chalav, and it's for that reason it's going to be a problem. But the Gemara ultimately was doichet. The Gemara said that's not true. That's not an issue. Rabbi Shua, by the way, gave another mahalach. The Gemara was doichet at it as well, and the Gemara left it open, and that's why the Amiram had to chime in, and that's what Shmuel famously said. But here's the point. The point, says the Gemara, is that you see that there was a time in the discussion between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yeshua. Before Rabbi Yeshua debated this with Rabbi Yishmael, he was of the opinion that the reason Gvinas Akum is aser is because we look at the chalav as being basar. And for Kert, in that time, you didn't have to come on to because anyways, there was an issue, a more obvious issue, because of the concern of the chalav and the keva. So says the Gemara that la'olam, I could tell you, La'olam, I could tell you that the reason there was an issue over here, the reason Shmuel in our Mishnah is saying that Keva is Aser, and then he's coming on and he's saying, our Mishnah, and where Shmuel is being Befarish our Mishnah, that's Shittas Rabbi Yeshua before Rabbi Yishmael proved him from the Karban Oila to be Chayzer. Whereas when Shmuel said, it's talking about after the Chazara. So there was a before and after you see from the Sugya in Avodah Zarah. So it could be this steer in Shmuel is not Shver. The Erste Shmuel is the before and the second Shmuel is the after. Either way, we now go to the next part of the Gemara's discussion of the Mishnah, and that is the steer. So again, we said the Mishnah said 3 halachas. The first halacha and the third halacha seem to blatantly contradict each other. First halacha was Kevas Oivik Achavim V'Shal Nevela Harezu Asura. Now Machlokes Rav Huna and Shmuel had to learn the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah is saying 2 halachas or 1 halacha, but Kuli Alma Moidi that the Mishnah is saying a halacha that any chalav that's found inside the keva gets the status of the keva. And if the keva is nevela, then the chalav is going to be a nevela as well. According to Rav Huna, that's only one of 2 halachas that the Mishnah said, right? The Mishnah said, kevas oivik chavim, kosher, shchita, ma'alya, but the chalav might be chalav tmeya, because you bought it from oivik chavim, it's going to be also. Additionally, kosher milk, but non-kosher animal, the milk is also going to be a problem because I look at it as a shtik. According to Shmuel Chadik Tani, that's the only one halacha that's being said. But for sure, that's the halacha. Chalav that's found inside a non-kosher keva, the halacha is that chalav is, without a question, going to be asa. What was the third halacha of the Mishnah? Ksheira sheyankim in treifa kevasa asura. What we need is treifa sheyankim in ksheira kevasa muteres. And why is it muter? Because even though the treifa itself is asur, but if it was yoin kosher milk, everything is going to be okay. Freit the Gemara. Ksheira sheyankim in treifa v'chulu v'aktani reish kevasa v'kicham shal nevela reizu asura. That is the first halacha shtim with that second part of the third halacha. Rav Chizda. So Rav Chizda said reisha. Could be the whole halacha of the Mishnah is really an Issa D'Rabban. When we say the chalav that's found inside the cave is also, it's not midei rice, it's only midei Rabban. Could be by nevela, which is the first case of the Mishnah. Chazal were machmer and they answered, whereas the Sefer of the Mishnah is talking about treifa, they were mekel. So again, as much as we have a stira between the first and third halacha in the Mishnah, first halacha in the Mishnah is talking about nevela, third halacha is a treifa. From a machalas Asura's perspective, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. It's the same thing. But time is the Gemara. Maybe this is only an Istra Rabban. It's not an Istra Raisa. Rav Chizda. And if that's the case, maybe Chazal were machmer by nevela, and they weren't machmer by treifa. Reisha, Chazal were machmer because if it looks like you're eating nevela, we have to be machmer. The Sefer, there's a shchita. Oh, it looks like you're eating treifa. We're not so machmer. Amalei Rav told Rav Chizda. I hear the mahalach. Abavalav kol dechenu. If anything, in Svara, I think it actually makes more sense that the Rabbana would be machmer by treifa and be makel by nevela. Why? Because uman nevela madach nevela the meisa, which is disgusting. The isharis like kevas le'asle mechmena. You can be mata the chalav inside the cave of the nevela, but no one's coming to eat the actual nevela because it's considered maos. So amrit loy, and still you're saying, and I'll let it eat it. Treifa shchuta, as it relates to a treifa of an animal that's shchuta. The isharis also mechmena. Treifa is not disgusting, right? The animal that's sirchus, you're not going to eat it, right? You would eat it. Narvas Torah says you're not allowed to eat it. But there's more of a concern you might come to eat the basan. Like Kolshkein, you should be more machmer over there. So Tainis Rav Chiz, if this is an Isra Rabbanan, I would actually think that in Sfara it should be just the opposite. So because of it, the Gemara gives a different halach. Amar Rav Yitzchak, Amar Rav Yochanan, Rav Yitzchak said the name Rav Yochanan, like Kashn, I'll tell you the teretz of the steer in the Mishnah. And really it's the same way the Gemara was miyashiv the steer in Shmuel. Kan koidim chazara, kan la'acha chazara. The first halacha of the Mishnah is before Rabbi Yeshua was chayzit Rabbi Shmuel in the Sugya of Avodah Zarah Daf Chav Tes, where he held that the reason Gvinas Akim is aser is because of the keva. Oh, if that's the case, because of the milk that's found inside of there. So you see, the milk is aser. That's what the Mishnah holds in the beginning. The Mishnah in the third case is la'acha chazara. After Rabbi Shmuel told Rabbi Yeshua, I'll bring you a ride from the carbon oil, from the fact that the Kohen's allowed to eat the milk, that's not a problem. Oh, la'acha chazara, he already changed his mind. Now, if there's a before and after, so why would the Mishnah tell me the before and the after? Just tell me the after. Why are you also telling me the before, says the Gemara, Mishnah is Azavim Kaima, because that's the derech. Once something's a Mishnah, even if we're Chayzer, sometimes we leave the Mishnah here. This is a midah of Shah Mishnah and the Dreshes Pam. Sometimes we have this idea of Mishnah is Azavim Kaima. This is an example. So you're right, there is a steer. The Gemara is saying there is no Mahalach. I don't have an Eitzah head to answer this guy. If Chizda had a Mahalach, the Gemara knocked it out. But really, going back to Rabbi Yechanan's days, there was already an approach over here, and that is that there is no way to be Miyashiv. One is before the Chazara, and one is Lachazar. Now, we already knew from the previous Gemara that the first line of the Mishnah was before Rabbi Yeshua's Chazar, right? We knew it from the steer in Shmuel, because Shmuel seems to not hold of this halacha of Kevas Nevela being a problem. From the fact that he said that Gvinas Akim is only us, Kevas Nevela. Shmuel was Mefarish the Mishnah, so he clearly held like the Mishnah. Terry says, what did the Gemara say? Shmuel probably holds this. Mishnah is Rabbi Yeshua Kaidim Chazara. What we're saying now is essentially it's muchach that way from the Mishnah itself, because you see the Mishnah itself was chayzer, right? If you think about it, we had a steer Shmuel and we had a steer Minei Obey in the Mishnah, and it all is miyushav in the same way. Shmuel was mefarish a Mishnah that was all kaidim chazara. Shmuel Paskin not like that Mishnah of Kedem Chazara. Sai mitzad the Sugi and Avodah Zarah, because you see Rabbi Yeshua was Chayzer, and really Sai mitzad the Mishnah Minei Obey, because you see the Mishnah itself was Chayzer. So this before and after of Avodah Zarah Chav Tes in the Shakla B'Tayim between Yeshua is really playing itself out in this Mishnah Gufa. Right? There's no other way to be Miyash of the Mishnah. It's playing itself out in the Mishnah Gufa. The ration of the Mishnah, case number 1, is the before, and the seif of the Mishnah, case number 3, is the Chazara, that's the after. Zok the Gemara. Just a few psakim as it relates to everything that we just spoke about. Amr Rabbi Barabba, Amr Rabbi Yochanan. Mamidin bekevas nevelois, ve'im mamidin bekevas shchitas avikachavim. So Rabbi Barabba and then Rabbi Yochanan said that as relates to our sugya. So the keva, meaning the chalav that was found inside the stomach of nevela, is going to be mutter. And you want to make cheese from it, you can make cheese from it. But the chalav that's found inside the keva of an animal that had a shchita from a guy, that already is going to be a problem. Now, at first glance, this seems to be a stira minei obey. Shchita soivik chavim is nevela. That's the mission daf yud gimel amud aleph. So what's the difference if you're using kevas nevelos or kevas oivit koi chavim? I'm a fun of Rab Shimon bar Abba. Rab Shimon bar Abba heard Rab Chia bar Abba said. So he said, come on. When you're saying what you're saying, you probably hold Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's shittas? It's been a while. Daf lamed chesam beis. Who holds stam machsheves oivik kechavim lavodas kechavim. Rabbi Eliezer has a shitta that when oivik kechavim shechts, we assume he's shechting lavodas zara. And it's for that reason every shchitas oivik kechavim is not just nevela, like the Mishnah says on Daf Yud Gimel. It's worse than that. It's considered avodas zara mamish, and therefore it's asabana. Right? It's much more chomer. So if Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan would be going b'shittas Rabbi Eliezer, that would make sense. So the chiluk between kevas nevela and kevas oivik kechavim is one is just nevela, and the other one is avodah zara. There's a distinction. Maybe that's what's going on over here. So again, Rabbi Shimon bar Abba told Rabbi Chia bar Abba, "Kiman, Rabbi Eliezer, he was curious. He says, "Is that what's going on over here?" Malay, of course. Come on, right? He answered him rhetorically. Who else? Obviously, that's what I mean. That's the chiluk. So nevela, which is only machalos asura, is there. The chalav is going to be mutter. Whereas shchita savik chavim, within avodah zara, there it's going to be more chamer. There it's going to be us. Now, what's the chiluk? So Rashi explains the chiluk. Rashi says that the chalav that's inside an nevela. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Yochanan, based on the after of Rabbi Yeshua, based on the after of the Mishnah, the third case in the Mishnah, the seif of the third case in Mishnah, holds is not going to be an issue. But when it comes to avodah zara, it's different. The reason is because the avodah zara used to like it when their animals look plump, they look geschmack, right? So it's for that reason the chalav inside that makes the animal look a little bit inflated is something that the guy has enough from. Therefore, it's considered part of the tekrevis of avodah zara. Therefore, it has a din of avodah zara. It's going to be a problem. So mitzad the basic halach of the Mishnah, do I look at that milk as being basar or not? Lefia maskana, even though the first half of the daf sounded like this was an issue, but the maskana we know based on the chazara, it's not really an issue. But when it comes to avodah zara, there it's going to be different. Just to finish, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan said, "I'm the name of Rabbi Yochanan." Right? So Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, like Rav Dimi, like Ravin. He's one of the Chusayamas. When he came from Bavel. From Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, so he said over the name Rabbi Yochanan, "Mamidin bein bekevas nevela, bein bekevas shchitas oivik chavim shloi lachash dev Rabbi Eliezer." So he said over, not like Rabbi Chia bar Abba the name Rabbi Yochanan, but he said over that Rabbi Yochanan shita was you can be maimid in the cave of a nevela, right? That's not a problem. Why not? That chalav is mutter based on the after after of our sugya, but additionally, Kevesh Shchita Vichamim as well, because he held the like Rebbe Eliezer. Command Rebbe Eliezer, but he holds the like Rebbe Eliezer. So what's the bottom line? So again, we have conflicting reports in Shitas Rebbe Yochanan, so we're a little confused there, right? There's a before and there's an after, and there's two Rebbe Yochanan. So what's the bottom line? Says the Gemara, Ein Mamidin, Ba'or Keves Nevela. After all that, the halacha is you're not allowed to be maimed with the oir of a Keves Nevela. So again, that's Shmuz halacha, the oir of a Keves Nevela. You can't take a little bit of oir, put it inside. Avol Mamidin beKeves Nevela. You are allowed to use the Keves Nevela, beKeves Shchita Zayvik Echavim, like the second Rabbi Yochanan, because we're not chayish for Shitas Rabbi Eliezer. So as it relates to Raid, I thought that being that we're coming to an end of Perikal HaBasar, and really we're coming to the end of the Taruvos component of Maseches Chulin, it's kedai to go back to a discussion that we began 2 short weeks ago, and that is the history of the kashrus of Coca-Cola. So we mentioned that in the early 1930s, there was a big tumult amongst the Rabbanim. How is it that Coca-Cola is being marketed, advertised, and sold as being kosher? The one thing everyone knew about Coca-Cola was that they were extremely secretive about their ingredients. Nobody knew what exactly was inside Coca-Cola. Well, if you don't know what's in Coca-Cola, how are you supposed to know that it's kosher? And the decision was made to reach out to a Lithuanian Rav who had moved to the United States of America. He was living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is the hometown, the corporate headquarters of Coca-Cola. He was a tremendous, tremendous Talmud Chacham. And they felt that he would be able to use his Torah knowledge and the fact that he was in close proximity to the powers that be of Coca-Cola to perhaps penetrate what was going on there and be able to come back with a conclusive decision. Is Coca-Cola kosher or is it not kosher? The name of that rabbi was Rabbi Tobias Geffen, Rav Tuvia Geffen, and we talked about how when he made his initial attempt to try to get in, he was completely shut down. But hashkacha through hashkacha, he had a friend who was general counsel of Coca-Cola at the time, a man by the name of Harold Hirsch, who, by the way, if you think about it, he was general counsel of Coca-Cola, which means he was a very early shareholder of Coca-Cola. He got in at a very, very low price. Turns out he was a very, very wealthy person. He was a huge philanthropist. In fact, he graduated, I think, from Emory University Law School, and the law school is named after him. So a very important person in the secular world, but also in the Jewish community in Atlanta, Georgia. So Rav Tuvia Geffen gets to know Mr. Harold Hirsch, and he asked him, is there any way for him to be able to, give him a behind the scenes of what's going on so he can get back to all the Rabbanim and tell them whether Coca-Cola is kosher or not kosher? To make a long story short, which we already did, he was initially shut down. Eventually, he was told he can get in. And when he finally got in and was given access to the ingredients, he discovered that, lo and behold, one of the ingredients that was being used was glycerol, or more popularly referred to as glycerin, which is an animal byproduct, which meant that there was a component of non-kosher meat that was inside the Coca-Cola. Rav Tuvia Geffen sat down, he wrote a tshuva, and he said that there's no question in the world, Coca-Cola is not kosher. Now, he bavared. You're going to tell me, even though there's glycerin inside the Coca-Cola, but based on the information he was given, it was less than 1,000th of the total ingredients of what was inside the Coca-Cola. But based on a Rashba that the Shulchan Aruch brings in Hilchas Yain Nesach in Yeridei Siman Kuf Lamed Daled that says that although there's halacha bittul b'roiv and certainly bittul b'shishim, but at the same time, to the extent that there's an ingredient inside a taruvos that's darkei bekach, it's one of the predetermined ingredients, then there's no halacha of bittul. The Rashba was meichiach this from the sugya of Gvinas Akim, the topic of today's daf, by the way. But the point is, the Rashba, which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, said that you don't say bittul to the extent that this davar muad is purposefully being put into this taruvas. And based on that, Rav Tuvia Geffen said that it's not going to be okay. We spoke a little bit about, so Reb Tuvia Geffen comes and he writes this tshuva and he says Coca-Cola B'Asher Usham is not fine, but there were Rabbanim that seemed to claim that it was kosher. Now, forget about did they have access, not have access. That's beyond the scope of this raid bite, and it's above my pay grade. For that, we'd have to have more historical knowledge in terms of knowing where exactly they were coming from when they went ahead and they said the Coca-Cola was kosher. But you have to assume they knew what was inside. And if they knew what was inside, and they knew there was glycerin inside, so based on that, how in the world could they have possibly said it's kosher? And you'll tell me because it's bottle? No, it's not. The Rashba that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch says it's not okay. And that was really the second half of the raid bite where we mentioned that it's based on a tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda. This Noda B'Yehuda is in Yeridea, Madura Tinyana, it's in Simin Nun Vav, where the Moifes Adar, the Gadol Adar, the Poisek Adar, the Noda B'Yehuda said that lehalacha, we could be mekel the leikar Rashba, because really that Rashba is telling the sugya of Gvinas Akum, and the Rambam and the Rimagash had a whole different mahalach how to learn the sugya of Gvinas Akum, and the Yehuda was meichiach that the Shulchan Aruch paskins actually not like the Rashba, but rather like the Rambam and the Rimagash, and he said kedaihem harambam varimagash lismoich aleim. There's no question in the world you don't have to be machmir like this Rashba. Now the Yehuda was obviously not talking about Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola is America's pastime, but Yehuda is writing his tshuva in 18th century Moravia. Yehuda was talking about a drink that we probably should not drink, which is called Krambabui Fereski, which was similar to Coca-Cola in that there was a little bit of nevela inside. Sounds like they might have been mechavan to Coca-Cola's secret recipe centuries earlier. But the point is that there too, there was a very, very similar shaila, and Rabbi Yehuda was mat l'chatchila to go ahead and drink it. Now, we talked about, at the end of the day, it wasn't Reb Tuvia Geffen, right? The Shulchan Aruch paskins the Rashba. How could the Rabbi Yehuda say a shtickle Torah to Shulchan Aruch? Doesn't paskin the Rashba, and if anything, isn't it a stira? We spoke out from Moshe in one of his sherry cask shuvas to the Gaivid of Elizabeth, Rab Pinchas Taitz, where you see from that exchange that Moshe was learning up in the Rabbi Yehuda davar nifla, and that is, the Rabbi Yehuda must have held that the Shulchan Aruch, although he brings the Rashba, he brought it in one place, in Kuf Lamed Daled in Hilchas Yayin Nesach, and the Yehuda was bothered that 50 simonim passed, and Shulchan Aruch didn't feel that it had to tell you this such basic halacha that to the extent that there's an ingredient, you don't say the halacha of bittul, you would think this would be in the psicha shir of bittul. How is it possible that it took 50 simonim for the Shulchan Aruch to bring it? And Yehuda therefore held that it was pashat him that this is a halacha in Yayin Nesach, mitzad the chumr of Yayin Nesach, and Rav Moshe said, by the way, if that's the case today, you don't have to be machrim by Yayin Nesach, Kiyadua, the first Ramon Hilchas Yayin Nesach. But the bottom line is the poskim that came prior to Reb Tuvia Geffen, Ubesoichan, Reb Yaakov Bienenfeld Sr., were relying on this Tshuvas Noda B'Yehuda. Reb Tuvia Geffen in himself, in his Tshuva that we read from, addressed, he bavarned the Noda B'Yehuda. And he said, even though the Noda B'Yehuda, but the Shulchan Aruch brings the Rashba, Reb Tuvia Geffen was machmer. He didn't want to be soimach on this kula from the Noda B'Yehuda, and as a result, he came out, he said that Coca-Cola is a problem. The Ma'aser Jews continued to drink Coca-Cola. So we mentioned the rest of the story is that he used his clout, his protector, his relationship with Mr. Harold Hirsch to get Coca-Cola to change the ingredients, or at least to tweak the ingredients, and he got them to replace the animal glycerin with vegetable glycerin, which Kamufan completely avoided this issue, and this really was where Coca-Cola Part 1 concluded. But here's Part 2. And Be'ezer Hashem, there's going to be a Part 3 as well, maybe even a Part 4. And that is, it was a davar pashut throughout this discussion that glycerin is not kosher. It makes sense that glycerin would be not kosher. It's an animal byproduct, and to the extent that the animal is not a kosher animal, it's pashut that it would be a problem. The sugi was, do you say bittul, do you not say bittul? Rashba, nish Rashba, Noda B'Yehuda. I don't want to be soymich on the Noda B'Yehuda. The Shulchan Aruch only brings the Hilchas Yayin Nesach, but this is all presupposing that I have a chefza of Isser, and the question is whether or not this Isser is batal, or whether this Isser is not batal. But the truth is, I think we have to take a step backwards. And we have to ask ourselves, should it be so pashut that glycerin is not kosher? Granted, glycerin from a non-kosher animal essentially is a chelek of a non-kosher animal. But the way that the glycerin is produced involves a very complex process, during which point it's going to go through a phase where seemingly it's not going to be roy lachila. You can't stick a fork and a knife in it and have it with a glass of wine. In fact, it's going to be processed with so many chemicals that you could almost make the argument that even though it's true it's part of an animal, but I don't know, this doesn't really look like a part of an animal. And does that impact halacha, or does that not impact halacha? Me'inyan le'inyan ba'osa inyan. There was a very, very hot, contested halachic debate. Maybe the greatest halachic debate in Jewish American history. Again, we're still in the spirit of 250. But this might be number one. It's for sure on Mount Rushmore, pun intended. And that is gelatin. Is gelatin kosher or is it not kosher? And by the way, we make this disclaimer a lot. Now we have to do it in neon lights. This is 100% not a halachic discussion. We know lahalacha kimu v'kiblu that gelatin is not kosher. That's not what this is about. But just from a historical perspective, gelatin. So what exactly is gelatin? So gelatin comes, most cases, from the bones or the skin of an animal, which means that if it's being produced by a non-kosher manufacturer, it's going to be coming from a non-kosher animal. It's actually worse than that. In more than most cases, it comes from a pig. Meaning, in most situations, gelatin comes from either pig skin or it comes from pig bones. And if that's the case, at first glance, you would think that gelatin should be dead on arrival. Stating that, similar to glycerin, gelatin goes through a tremendous evolutionary process where at the time that it's gelatin and it's being put into whatever product it is that it's being put into, it doesn't have a remez, ben benoy shel remez, to the chazer. It has no shaykhs to having split hooves or chewing its cud. At that point, it's a completely different item. And really, this halachic discussion, as it relates to glycerin, is a halachic discussion which relates to gelatin as well. From a historical perspective, gelatin was a much bigger topic than was glycerin. And the reason is because it was used much more popularly. Now, it's interesting, glycerin comes from animal fats. Gelatin comes from what's called collagen. It comes from the bone of the skin. It comes from the protein of the animal. So if you're a chemist, if you're a scientist, you would say, no, shaykhis, Beinenu, they're very, very similar. They both come from a non-kosher animal, but at the same time, by the time it'll make it into, your product or whatever it is, it's going to completely be altered. Additionally, the usage of glycerin was very different than the usage of gelatin. Glycerin is a moisturizer, also has a little bit of taste. So it'd be used in products that require some level of moisture, right? So for example, skin creams are going to very often have glycerin inside of them. Additionally, it's a low-fat sweetener. So a lot of the low-fat products have a little bit of glycerin inside of it. Gelatin is used, kishmoi kachi. It's used to create that jello feel. And really the most hooded area where it was discussed back in the day in the United States of America was Jell-O was made from gelatin, right? Back in the day, before there were like 18-layer cakes, your mother served you Jell-O for dessert. I remember in yeshiva, that's what we used to have every single day, right? So Jell-O was once upon a time a very, very big deal. And the regular Jell-O that you would buy at a local supermarket was made from gelatin. And this was a big topic. Is gelatin kosher or is it not kosher? And really, it was put in a lot of different products. A lot of these gummy bears or jelly beans, Wrigley's gum, Kiyadua. But again, if you know, you know. But the bottom line is, it was a very, very popular item. And there was a big discussion whether or not gelatin is kosher or is not kosher. And really, it ties very much into the same exact shaila glycerin. Is it kosher or is it not kosher? Now, just before we set this up, just to appreciate a little bit better, in terms of how exactly gelatin is made. So, here we go. We can focus on glycerin. We can focus on gelatin. Glycerin is more negeya, the sugi of Coca-Cola. But really, the chuvas and everything that was ever written on it was written primarily on gelatin, less so on glycerin. So I think we're going to focus on glycerin, on gelatin, with an understanding that it's all me'inyan le'inyan ba'oseinin. So again, the basic process of gelatin, the preparation, that's the first thing. So you need the raw materials, which are the hides, the bones, and the skins. They're all cleaned of fat and all the non-collagen material. The next thing that's done is what's referred to as the pre-treatment. The material is soaked in either an acid or an alkaline/lime solution to break down the collagen structure and loosen it from the other tissue. The third thing that's done is there's an extraction process. The treated material is repeatedly washed and then heated in hot water. This hydrolyzes the collagen into soluble gelatin, extracted in multiple batches at increasing temperatures. The fourth thing is filtration and purification. The extracted liquid is filtered, deionized, and clarified to remove impurities. Finally, there's a concentration and a drying process. The gelatin solution is concentrated, meaning evaporated, then cooled to a gel, extruded into strands or sheets, and dried. The dried gelatin is then ground into granules of powder for sale. The bottom line is, from the time that it leaves the bones of the chazer until it makes it into jello, it's had a long day. It's gone through a lot. It has to bench a goimel 15 times, right? So it definitely goes through this incredible chemical process. And here's the question. The question is, does that change anything lahalacha, or does that not change anything lahalacha? That will be the topic, be'ezah Hashem, of this next year. Now, like all good halachic controversies, they begin how? With a tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda. So the Noda B'Yehuda, in a tshuva, and this is in Madura Kama, it's in Yeridei Simin Chavav, he was asked the question about the shalfuchis of a dag tameh that was being put into certain mashka. Is it okay or is it not okay? So the shalfuchis of a fish is the swim bladder of a fish. It's an organ of a fish. And apparently, there was a certain mashka, the mashka of med, also known as mead. So this was a honey-based mashka, it had an alcoholic kick to it. And it seems that the makers of it would take the shalfuchis, the swim bladder of this non-kosher fish, and they would put it inside. The reason they put it inside was not to give taste, but it seems it had the ability to just clarify, just to make the liquid a little bit more clear. So this liquid, because it had honey inside, there was a lot of shmarm, there was a lot of sediment. It doesn't look so nice if you're going to drink it that way. So if you want it to look like a nice clear liquid, so they would add this shalfuchis, they would put it inside, and that would go ahead and clarify it. And the question that was asked to the Noda B'Yehuda was, is it okay for a yid to drink it, or is it not okay for a yid to drink it? Now, at first glance, you'll tell me it should be tali, and whether there's bittul, there's not bittul. Assuming there's a bittul, and based on that, you can argue that maybe you'll be okay, but there was a follow-up question, and that is, the halach is im avatlanis l'chatchila. So could a yid go ahead, and could a yid manufacture it? Could he produce this? Jews were making this. So could they go to the store, buy the shalfuchis, put it inside their made vash, put it inside their meat, and go ahead and have this mashka? You'll tell me it's batal, very nice, but there's halacha, the raisa for sure, the rabbanon, im avatlanis l'chatchila. And this is what was asked to the Noda B'Yehuda. This shalfuchis that's being put into this meat, is it okay, or is it not okay? So Rabbi Yehuda sat down, and he wrote a tshuva shehutzrich l'dayris. Rabbi Yehuda said as follows. At first glance, there seems to be a very obvious sushtal to this halacha. And that is in the Ramah, in Siman Pei Zayin, right in the beginning of Hilchos Basa V'Chala. So the first Siman in Hilchos Basa V'Chala was Siman Pei Zayin. This Ramah is in Sif Yud. Zok the Ramah, Oir HaKeva, the skin of the keva, the Oir HaKeva, featured very prominently in today's daf. L'famim moilchen oisei. There were times that it would be salted, umiyavshen oisei, and they would dry it, v'nasa ke'etz, to the point that it becomes like a shtick holz. It becomes so oisgetrickend, oisgewebt, that it literally becomes like a piece of wood. Umimalen oisei chalav, and there are people that would fill it up with milk. Is this okay or is it not okay? Could you take a keva, which is basar, but after you salted it and you dried it up, it's like an eitz ba'alma, could you fill it up with water and go ahead and eat this? Says the Rama mutter, you're allowed to. The me'acha shenes yavesh, because being that it dries out, havi ka eitz ba'alma, it becomes like a piece of wood. Ve'ein boy lachluchas basar. There's no basar anymore. And if there's no basar anymore, paskin drama, at this point, this is something that's going to be okay. So it says in Behuda, b'muscharishin, I think this is what it is. Because I did a little bit of inquiries, and it sounds like this shalfuchas, when they put it in, it's already dried out, and the Yehuda describes the process of how it's made, and it's literally like that oisgetrik in a keva. And just like the Ramah Paskin that it's ke'etz ba'alma, doesn't have a din basar anymore, so the shalfuchas wouldn't have a din basar either. Stating that, said the Noda B'Yehuda. And you know, anytime you learn the Chuvas Noda B'Yehuda, there's always a great chap. So says the Noda B'Yehuda, chap is right in the beginning. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, I think it's chaluk b'yasayid. You know what the chaluk is? The keva is kosher, right? The keva be'etzim is kosher. You're allowed to eat it. Narvas, after you go ahead and you mix it with chalav, that's when the isser comes about. To the extent that by the time you mixed it with the chalav, it was already ke'etz ba'alma, so then the Ramos Paskin and said the Noda Yehuda that it can't be chal isser on a keva that right now is an eitz ba'alma. But the shalfuchas of the dag tameh, that was born aser, because it comes from a dag tameh. So over there, the isser pre-existed the fact that it became the eitz ba'alma. Narvas, you want that now that it became an eitz ba'alma, the isser should go away. Says the Noda Yehuda, you have no right from that Ramah. The Ramah is talking about a keva which is mutter. It only becomes aser when it's inside with the chalav. To the extent that it's ke'etz ba'alma at the time that it was inside with the chalav, it could be lo yal zen nemar the isser bas of a chalav, because it's eitz and chalav. Eitz and chalav can't become aser, as opposed to the shalfuchas of the dag tameh. Over there, it was born isser. So the isser existed literally mitchilas briyasai. What's the shaila? Now that it became ke'etz ba'alma, maybe it's paka the isser. Says the Noda Yehuda, I can make a very strong argument that the isser doesn't have an ability to be paka. Either Ramah, the Ramah is saying that when it's ke'etz ba'alma, it can't become aser. But to say that it should be paka the isser, that not. Oh, but the Noda Yehuda said, even though the svara is a klara svara, but lamaisa need a back up to the svara. Avival the Ramos paskening that once something is an eitz ba'alma, it can't become aser. That means when it's eitz ba'alma, we don't look at it as keva, right? We don't look at it as basar anymore. So I think the same thing maybe would be true. The shalfuchas of the dag tameh, even though now and only now it's becoming ke'etz ba'alma, and mitchilas parasi was already aser b'seder. When it was a shalfuchas of a dag tameh, it was aser, but now it's an eitz ba'alma. So if it's an eitz ba'alma, it shouldn't be aser anymore. It says in Noda Yehuda that the makar to my chilik. The makar to my chilik is a sugi mesechtes avodah zara, daf samach zayin amud beis, which goes on to daf samach ches and alf. And again, all these gemaras that we're going to learn now are mamish yisoidi for everything that we've been learning the last couple of weeks. So we know that in the world, the bas of chalav and taruvos, there's a sugi of nois and tam lefgam. Nois and tam lefgam. Is it mutter or is nois and tam lefgam masa? The truth is, the origin to the sugya of nois and tam lefgam is a brayso in avodah zara samach zayin amud beis. Says the brayso, echon nois and tam lefgam, ve'echon nois and tam leshvach asa div Rameir. Rameir says, if you have a chefza machalas asuras, and by the way, we're not talking about we have a kedera that has a little bit of a blia and it's already yoser from 24 hours, and you want to know if it's nois and tam lefgam, nois and tam leshvach. We're discussing not the blia, we're discussing the real thing. We're discussing we have a piece of flesh that right now just doesn't taste good. It smells, it's disgusting, nobody wants to eat it. Right now it's nois and tam lefgam. So says Rameir, if you have machalas asura, such as nevela, I don't care if it's nois and tam lefgam or if it's nois and tam leshvach, echad, the echad aser, it's going to be aser. Rav Shimon says, l'shvach aser lefgam mutter. If it's nois and tam leshvach, it's going to be aser. If it's nois and tam lefgam, at that point, it's going to be mutter. So Reb Shimon is the one in this sugya that holds, as it relates to a shtick flesh, that's nois and tam lefgam, it's going to be mutter. Rameir says, echad nois and tam leshvach, that's nois and tam lefgam. Either way, it's going to be asa. So I'm skipping a little bit. Says the Gemara, Reb Shimon my time. What's Pshan and Reb Shimon that holds that nois and tam lefgam is mutter? The Tanya, it's based on the following brayso. So it says in the Torah, lo yisoichlu kol nevela. What do you do with the nevela? La ger asher b'sharecha titneno va'achala. Says the brayso, kol aruya leger. Anytime I have nevela, that I can be mekayim what the Torah said you're supposed to do with the nevela, and that is give it to the ger. So if it's something that's roy to the ger, kruy nevela, that's going to be considered a nevela. She'en roy leger, and kruy nevela. Nois and tam lefgam means not just it doesn't taste so geshmak. It's ein roy leger. If it's ein roy leger, it says Reb Shimon, it's going to be mutter. So the Gemara Rameir. What does Rameir do with that? Rameir holds nois and tam lefgam is also just like nois and tam leshvach. I have a drasha. Ahulim mute srucha meikar. That's coming to be memayed in the event that this nevela was always saruach. So at the time that it became nevela, it was already disgusting, nobody was going to eat it. In that case, I'm asking, there's a drasha of leiseichel kol nevela, leger shebesh arecha kol aruya, leger kruy nevela, v'she'en ruya, leger en kruy nevela. But to the extent that it started off good and only later it became pagum, at that point it's going to be different. In other words, there's a machlokes Rameir and Reb Shimon, which after further review is a case where you have something, machalas asuras, nevela, let's keep it simple, which was a perfect nevela, it was a good piece of meat, and then something happened, it became saruch afterwards. Right now, it's nois and tam lefgam. You're allowed to eat it or you're not allowed to eat it. Reb Shimon says you're allowed to eat it. Because Reb Shimon holds right now, you can't give it to the ger, it doesn't have the Isin Avela. Reb Meir says no. In this situation, being that it was once okay, so now you want to go ahead and now you want to be matir it, the fact that it's not Ruya Leger doesn't have the ability to be matir. Now, if it was Saruach Meikara, if it started off already bad, so in that situation, Anachinami. But as it relates to a situation where it started off good and then it was Sriach afterwards, says Rameir, B'chaygav, Echon Noisen Tam L'Shvach, Echon Noisen Tam L'Fgam, the halach is it's going to be us. Says the Neidah Yehuda, if you take a look at the Rambam, and really if you go through the Sugya, there's no hachra, whether we passing like Rameir or Rab Shimon, as it relates to the Shaila. Where you have something that is non-kosher, it started off being Roy Lachila, and then only later it became any Roy Lachila. Is it going to be Mutek Shitas Rab Shimon, or is it going to be Asat Shitas Rab Meir? The Gemara is not machriya. The Rambam in the Yad Chazaka doesn't have a sif, where the Rambam tells you mefurish what it's going to be. So if that's the case, says the Neidah Yehuda, we're muchrach to try to figure out on our own what the halach is. So what do you do in Klali Apsak if there's a machlokes Rameir and Reb Shimon? Says the Neidah Yehuda, it's a mefurish Gemara. It's a Gemara in Erev in Daf Mevava Mebez. The Gemara says that if there's ever machlokes Rameir and his Baal Plukta, we don't pass him like Rameir. If there's ever machlokes Reb Shimon and his Baal Plukta, we don't pass him like Reb Shimon, right? Rameir and Reb Shimon, it's tough because they were so great, that we've spoken about over the years, that kemat, in all cases, ain't halacha kemoisa. Says the Gemara, Ibaylahu, Rameir Rab Shimon, halacha k'divrei mi. What do you do if there's a machlokes Rameir Rab Shimon? And the Gemara says, Teku, Tishbi, Yataris, Kushis, V'yibayas. For this, you're going to have to wait for Eliyahu Tishbi to come. Says the Neidah Yehuda, so now what do I do? I mean, up his encouragement till Eliyahu Navi shows up. So what are you supposed to do? Is halacha like Rameir? Is halacha Rab Shimon? So says the Neidah Yehuda, he brings from one of the Kadmoinim that said that in a situation like this, halacha k'divrei ha-machmer. So if Rameir is the machmer, you're going to go like Rameir. And if Reb Shimon's the machmer, you're going to go like Reb Shimon. Now, in this sugya, who's the machmer? Rameir is the machmer. So if that's the case, says the Neidah Yehuda, the way I'm walking away from Avodah Zarah Samech Zayin Samech Ches is the halacha has to be like Rameir. That to the extent you have food that was roy lachila, and then it became any roy lachila, became nois and tam lefkam, not Saruach Mikar. Where it happened later, Rameir is machmer, echen nois and tam lefkam, echen nois and tam leshvach. Reb Shimon's mekel, halacha k'divrei machmer. So what would be the halacha as it relates to nois and tam lefkam? If it starts off nois and tam lefkam, betchilas briyas ha'isser, then al zen nema the drosh leisaychul kol nevela ger shabbat sharech kol real ger kri nevela visha in real ger and kri nevela. If however it started off good and it only became later, for that you don't have the drosh. It's a machlokes Rameir, but we pass like Rameir, and it's for that reason in that situation the halach is it's going to be us. But the Neidah Yehuda went weiter. He said that the emes is, I don't think you only have to say that the halach is like Rameir based on Erev and Memvav teku when there's a machlokes Rameir Reb Shimon v'halach k'divrei machmer. Because the emes is another sugi in Shas, says the Neidah Yehuda, which l'chura is mamish talui in this sugya right here. That other sugya is a Mesachtes Bechayres, daf Chof Gimel Amud Beis. The sugya over there is discussing the tumah chamura of nevela. So we know nevela is mitama, tumah chamura. It's not only mitama b'maga, but it's mitama b'masa as well. And the Gemara brings that there was a machlokes between Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan. In the event that you have nevela, that's einei ruya la'achilas ger, is it going to be considered an nevela that it should be mitama b'masa, the tumah chamura, or is it not considered nevela because it's einei ruya la'achilas ger, and as a result, it's not going to be able to be mitama b'masa? In that sugya, Rabbi Yochanan holds that if I have nevela that's einei ruya la'achilas ger, I don't care. It's still metama b'masa. Bar Pada says no. Tumah chamura ad leger, that it has to be roy la'achilas ger in order for it to be metama tumah chamura. Tumah kala, tumah smaga, that it would be able to be metama. You go through the Gemara inside, the Gemara says, my time of the Rabbi Yochanan, what's Pshat in Rabbi Yochanan? Why does Rabbi Yochanan hold that, my time at the Bar Pada, what's Pshat in Bar Pada? The Bar Pada holds that if you would have a nevela that's not ro'i la'achilas ger, at that point it's not going to be metama tumah chamura. Says the Gemara d'chsev, lo yisoichlu kol nevela lager hashem b'sharechtet nerav ha'achol haruy lager kri nevela v'she'enu ruy lager enu kri nevela, because the only time something is considered nevela l'inyan tumah, that's the sugi over here, is only if it's ro'i la'achilas ger. If it's not ro'i la'achilas ger, it's not called nevela. Good, it's still tamei, but the tumah chamura it's not going to have. The Idach says, what was Rabbi Yochanan hold? Lamutei hecha desricha meikara. I know this as Adrasha, but it's Lamutei hecha desricha meikara. This sugya of B'chayres Chav Gimel, that's discussing Tumah Chamura of Nevela Zok tonight is the identical sugya that you have in Avodah Zarah Samach Zayin Samach Ches. What's the difference? In Avodah Zarah Samach Zayin Samach Ches we're discussing Achilas Nevela, and in B'chayres we're discussing Tumas Nevela. But the Svaras HaMachloikis is identical. Now I know, because in both sugyas the Gemara tells you what the Svaras HaMachloikis is. And the shaila is how you darshan lo'isaychel kol nevgela l'ger shebesh harechet nene v'acholo. Do you say it's true only for Srucha Meikara, or do you say it's true anytime that it's a Sriach? And in both cases, and in both sugyas, that's exactly what's going on. So it says the Noida Yehuda, it's pasha to me that the machlokes bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan in Bechayres Chav Gimel is the same exact machlokes as the machlokes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon in the Seif Avodah Zarah. And if that's the case, bar Pada, who is Meikol, in the event that it's Lois and Tam Lefkam, it's any Roy Lachilas Ger, even if it wasn't Srucha Meikara, in Bechayres Chav Gimel, he's going Beshitas Reb Shimon in Avodah Zarah Samach Zayin Samach Ches, who is Meikol when it comes to Achilas Nevelo, to the extent that it only was his Sriach later, because right now it's any Roy Lachilas Ger, it's not Lois and Tam Lefkam. And it's, again, basically, Loisaychel Kol Nevelo Ger, I don't care if it was yesterday or today, at the end of the day, right now, it's not Roy Lachilas Ger, so it's not Roy Lachila, Shitas Reb Shimon, and there's not going to be Matam either. That's going to be Shitas Bar Pada. But if that's the case, Rabbi Yochanan in the Sugya B'Chayres Chav Gimel on the base, who's Chaluk with Bar Pada, is Mamash Shitas Rab Meir in the Sugya Avodah Zarah. And just like Rab Meir said in Avodah Zarah that Echon Nois and Tam Lefkam ve'Echon Nois and Tam Leshvach, unless it's Srucha Meikara, in the same vein, Rabbi Yochanan is saying the same exact thing. And he's saying Echon Nois and Tam Lefkam ve'Echon Nois and Tam Leshvach as it relates to the Tumah Chamura of Tumas Avelo, unless it was Srucha Meikara. So it says in Rabbi Yehuda, half of a fellow. In the Sugya in Avodah Zarah, there was talking no Hachra, whether the halacha is like Reb Shimon, the halacha is like Reb Meir. So for that, we had to come on to Erevim involved in the days, halacha Kedivri HaMachmer. Abezok the Noida Yehuda, Chabat Zweite Sugya. I have a Sugya in Bechayres Chav Gimel. And in the Sugya Bechayres Chav Gimel, I have a Machlokes Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan in the same exact Shiloh. And it's Pasha to me, it's the same Sugya. Oh, if that's the case, now it got easy. Because what do you do in Halach if there's Machlokes Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan? What do you do in Halach if there's Machlokes anybody and Rabbi Yochanan? The Halach is like Rabbi Yochanan. So it's Pasha the Halach is like Rabbi Yochanan in Bechayres Chav Gimel on base. And by the way, if you take a look at the Rambam, says in Yehudim Perakal of Hilchas Avos Latuma, he paskins Bok Tzeinu Shittas Rabbi Yochanan. So if that's the case, if the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan in Bechayres Chav Gimel, that means the halacha is like Rabbi Meir in the Sugyas and Avodah Zarah. And if that's the case, said the Noida Yehuda, it's pasha to me, lehalacha, that when it comes to the Sugya of Macholas Asuras, but right now it's not Roy Lachilas Ger. Right now nobody would put this in his mouth. It's pasha physically, b'mitzias, balabatish, not Roy Lachila. What's the halacha? Well, it depends. If it was not Roy Lachila at the time that it was becoming Aser, Srucha Meikara, I have a drasha, Seichel Kol Nevelo, Lagera Shebesh Harechet, Nene V'Achala. If, however, it was Aser, but afterwards it was his Sricha, over there the halacha is like Reb Meir, which is really Shittas Rabbi Yochanan, over there the halacha is going to be that at that point, it is going to be Asa B'Achila. Said the Noida Yehuda. To me, I think it's Pasha, that when the Ramos said that if you have this keva that started off as a keva, and then it got oisgetricken because it was gezalzen, whatever exactly happened to it, and right now it's ke'etz ba'alma. Says Ramah, you want to eat it together with chalav, there's no iser basav chalav. That's because when the keva becomes ke'etz ba'alma, it's einay roy lachilas ger. And being that the Isser Keva only happens when it's Nis'arif together with the Chalav. So if it's Nis'arif together with the Chalav at a time that it's Einu Roy Lachilo, it's the Srucha Meikara. And B'chai Gavna, the halacha is, Shitas Rameir, everybody agrees to this, Nois and Tam Lefkam is going to be mutter. However, as it relates to the Shalfuchis of this Dag Tameh, that's already different. Because the Shalfuchis of the Dag Tameh, before it became Ke'etz Ba'almi, before it was being processed to use with this meat, at that point it was already Yasser. So now you're dealing with a situation that was not his Sricha Meikara. Something that was good, and then later was Saruach. Well, there too, the halacha is like Reb Meir. You're not going to say Nois and Tam Lefkam. Al Zen Nemar, Echad Nois and Tam Lefkam, Ve'echad Nois and Tam Leshvach. It's for that reason it's going to be Aser. Said the Neit Yehuda, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not just saying a Svar Ba'alma. I'm coming literally from the Sugyas Alei. By the way, This is the first page of a 10-page Chuvas Noida Behuda. It's not normal when you sit down and go through Chuvas Noida Behuda a little bit, what's going on there. It's Pasha Nichts Gleiben in the Vel. But this is the beginning of Chuvas Noida Behuda, and this was the psak of the Noida Behuda. He said that it's true there's a Ramah. The Ramah already told us, he was megalit us this idea, that if you have food that is problematic from a kashrus perspective, and now it's ke'etz ba'alma, it's any roy lachilas ger, it's mutter, but stating that based on the way the Noida Behuda understood the sugin avodah zarah, the sugin b'chayres, it's only going to be true as it relates to in that state it can't become aser. But if it was aser, now that it's in that state, that iser is not going to be okay. It's interesting. This Chuvas Noida Behuda goes down as a controversial Chuvas Noida Behuda. Usually it's the kula of the Noida Behuda that we're having this conversation about. Oh, here's the chumrah of the Noida Behuda. The Pesachei Tshuva already in Siman Pei Zayin on this Ramah quotes the Noida Behuda very bekitzer. He says, I'm the Noida Behuda that made this distinction, and then he quotes from one of the Kadmonim, the Teferes Tzvi, who already was ma'orer the loika Noida Behuda. But the truth is, it wasn't just the Teferes Tzvi. If you look at the Poskim kemat kulon keish echad b'leiv echad, were very, very troubled by this Noida Behuda. And the reason they were troubled was for many, many reasons. Number one, the Noida Behuda named on that as it relates to this machlokes between Rameh and Reb Shimon, there's no hachra in the sugya, right? The Rambam didn't paskin, the sugya didn't paskin. You left with the take of Erevim and Vavam and Beis. So Noida Behuda with this charifish tells to another sugya in Bechayres. There we have a hachra, sayin the sugya and sayin the Rambam. And like this, Bazev and Gilal Zeh, we know how to paskin, and that's his chilik in this Ramah. Dvarim neflam ad l'ma'od. Stating that, Zogen the Gedolei Achroinim, the Rebbe forgot a Magid Mishnah. The Rambam in Hilchis Macholos Asuros, this is Perik Beis, Halacha Chaf Aleph. So the Rambam over there is discussing a beria. So sometimes the halacha is, if somebody eats Macholos Asuros, even if it's Pachas Mikazayis, it's going to be a problem, to the extent that it's a full beria. Says the Rambam, coming in middle, Va'afilu sarcha haberia, somebody has a barrier, and it was sarcha, it became disgusting. And the tzura of it changed. Even if you eat the entire thing, or because you ate the entire thing, you're going to get malchus. So the Rambam says if somebody eats a barrier, he gets malchus. And the Rambam adds, even if it was masriach and it was nishtanes, still the halach is, it's going to be aser. Says the Magid Mishnah. This Masha Kosev Rabbeinu, afilu sarcha habriya, hu b'shaloi sarcha v'hevisha ad kidei shleitei roi la'adam. It can't be talking about where it's at the point where it's not roi la'achilas adam. Avalim sarcha kol kach, because if it did become so disgusting that you can't give it to your neighbor the ger, kvar bir Rabbeinu beperik arba asra alach yudaf. The Ram already told us in perik yudal lach of aleph in Hilchos Macholos Asuros shemisha achal oichel ha'aser. Acha shehisriach v'hivish u'botol me'oichel adam hareze potter. V'chenu the halacha ki Rab Shimon the Amar Avodah Zarah daf samiches nevela she'ena rui lager loishma nevela u'kumoshi is barishal. Says the Magid Mishnah, the Rambam's telling you that if it's a sriach, it's still going to be a problem. But you better be very careful. Read the not such fine print. Right, that's the Magid Mishnah's job, to put the fine print on the side of the Rambam. So he says, let me tell you what you better know. That's only if it was hisriach a little bit. But if it was hisriach to the point that it's mamish disgusting, that it's ene roi lachila sager, at that point avada gevis, this halacha is not going to be true. You know why? Because the halacha is like Reb Shimon. How do I know that the halacha is like Shimon? The Rambam paskin like Reb Shimon. Where did he paskin that way? In Perik Yudal at Alach Yudalef. So what steht in Perik Yudal at Alach Yudalef? So the Rambam over there says as follows. The Rambam's talking about if somebody eats Macholos Asuros, but he eats it shaloi kederech hana. Ram says as follows: Halacha Yud. Kol oichlin asurim inay chayiv aleim at sheyoich loisem derech hana. All Macholos Asuros, you're only chayiv if you eat it derech hana. Chutz mi basa b'cholav v'kilei akerem fishalei nebe ben achila. Right? Other hoitzi isra achilasim b'lashon acheres b'lashon bishul. And it's for that reason, in those situations, you're going to be awesome, even if you're shloik der chana, a very famous Rambam. We need the next halacha. Halacha yidal keitzad harei shehimchas hachelev v'gamoy. If somebody would take chelev and he would liquefy it, and then he would swallow it, and kishucham, and he did it when it was very hot, achenich v'groina mimeno, like he literally burnt his throat, or he ate the chelev raw, or he mixed it with like bitter things, kigoin roish filana, l'toich yayinesech, and he put it in even to yayinesech. Or this is what we need. She'achal oichel ha'aser, or he ate machalas asuris, acher shehisriach vehivish, ubatel me oichel adam, and it's no longer roi lachilas adam, harei pater. The halacha is going to be pater. Says the Maggid Mishnah in Perek Beis halacha chav aleph that at first glance have a steer Rambam. In the halacha of aleph, as it relates to the beria, afilu sarcha beria v'nishtanis surasa. Still, you're going to get malchus. It's mefurish in Perek Yudal and halacha Yudal not that way. Oishna achal oichel aser achash esriach vehivish ubato me oichel adam harei ze pater. So the Maggid, there's only one way for me to understand this. One must be talking about a zal level of Isriach, and the other one's a zal level of Isriach. But from the fact that the Rambam in Perek Yud Aleph and Perek Yudal halacha Yud Aleph paskins that if somebody eats oichel, that was his riach, you're going to be potter. So you say, Marishit Rambam is Reb Shimon. The Rambam in Perek Beis must be talking about where it wasn't so disgusting. It's a Mefurish Maggid Mishnah, who no one knew more about the Rambam than the Maggid Mishnah, who learned up in the Rambam that the Rambam Shita is like who? The Rambam Shita is Reb Shimon. So if Yehuda sat down, he learned the Sugin Avodah Zarah, and he said, there's no hachra, I know halach like Reb Shimon. So he had to jump to Erev and Memvav, halach like Kedivri HaMachmer, he had to fly to Bechiris Chav Gimel. It's a Mefurish Rambam, or at the very least, it's a Mefurish Rambam Maggid. Learning up the Rambam Azai. So all the Achreinim, the Matmi on the Noida B'Yehuda, how could the Noida B'Yehuda have written a 15-page tshuva and not even mention this Rav Maggid? It's a Pelat Suma on the Noida B'Yehuda. But the bottom line is, the Shitz Rambam, for sure the way the Maggid Mishnah understood it seems to be, that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. That once Oichel is not Roi Lachilas Adam, I don't care if it was not Roi Lachilas Adam at the time that the Issa wanted to be Chal, or if the Issa was Chal and then only later it became Eini Roi Lachilas Adam. In either case, the halacha is going to be the same. The halacha is that it's going to be mutter. The truth is, if you look in the Rishonim, the Rashba, in Teres HaBayis, and this is in Teres HaBayis Ha'aruch, it's in Bayis Dalet Shar Aleph, and the Rosh in Perek Beis and Masechta Avodah Zarah in Simon Lamed, they both pass in Klora Reid like Reb Shimon. And again, the Noida B'Yehuda, for whatever reason in his tshuva, he failed to mention the Rashba, and he failed to mention this Rosh. Now the Emes says, Noida B'Yehuda has a stark kasha, because Noida B'Yehuda is timing that even if there's no Hachra in Avodah Zarah, but there's Hachra from Masechtas Bechiris. So what are you going to do? So the truth is, Tosfos already addresses this kasha in Bechiris Chav Gimel, and Tosfos already says that it's not muchach that the two sugis are totally zeh, because it's very yitachin that there's a chiluk between Issa Tumma versus Macholis Asuras. And it could be a Macholis Asuras, there's one way of looking at it, and as it relates to Tumma, there's another way of looking at it. But the point is, the Rishonim already made that distinction. And that's the chiluk, how it's possible that the Rambam in Perek Aleph Hilchas Avos HaTumma would paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, yet in the sheet of the Maggid Mishnah, in Hilchas Macholis Asuras, in Perek Yudalid, he would paskin like Reb Shimon. And that would stem how the Rashba and the Rosh, and by the way, other Rishonim as well, would have the places, they would have the right to go ahead and they would be able to paskin like Reb Shimon in the sugya of Avodah Zarah, even though it's pashit, Kol Bar Das understands, then in the sugya Bechiris, the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yochanan. It's not a stira, because it could be Isra Chila L'chud and Isra Tumah L'chud. But the bottom line is that this Noida B'Yehuda, this epic tshuva of the Noida B'Yehuda, really, in the world of the Achronim, was very, very mechudishtik, because the B'Yehuda almost felt this urge to reinvent the wheel and come up with a psak. How are you going to treat this machlokes Rameh and Reb Shimon? It's enough in a Maggid Mishnah. It's a Rashba, it's a Rosh. I mean, these are literally the Rebbes of Klal Yisrael, the Poskim of Klal Yisrael. And if that's the case, we already have a Mefurish Psak. And the Psak seems to be that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who we'll get to more in the course of these next few raid bites, has a very important tshuva on this whole topic. And this is in Yabia Omer. It's in Chelik Ches Yerdei Siman Yud Aleph. He has literally 4 pages dedicated to all the Rishonim and Achronim, where it's Mavur, the Loika, Noida B'Yehuda. And he brings from the Shvus Yaakov, from the Chida, the Marsham, Reb Chaim Oizer, they all named on for a davar pashat, that as much as the Noida B'Yehuda, certainly in this Chabur, but really in Klal Yisrael, is Nevuah shehutzrach l'dairis. Every tshuva that he wrote is fire and kvar hoyer zaken. And how could anybody go keneged a Noida B'Yehuda? But the Pesachei Tshuva already was meramis to it. And if you go through Chacham Ovadia's Arichas Advarim, you'll see that the Gedolei Achronim all named on not like this Noida B'Yehuda. This Noida B'Yehuda, again, not all, but it became a tshuva that even people that would say, how could you be mekel the loika Noida B'Yehuda? But the evidence, not like the Noida B'Yehuda, is so compelling. There's often a Rishonim, the Rambam, the Rashba, and the Rosh Beroshim that seem to be not that way. And if that's the case, a lot of poskim held that whenever you're posed with such a question, the halacha is going to be that we're mekel. That if you have food of machalos asuras, even if it was once roy lachila, but if right now it's einay roy lachilas ger, right now la halacha we're going to say that it's einay roy lachilas ger, lo yishma nevela, and if that's the case, it's no longer going to be considered machalos asuras, which would mean that in the case of the Noida Yehuda with the shalfuches, in that situation over there, there'd be makim lahakil, and any situation that's similar, where you're dealing with in front of you, which you know originated from a davar asur, and at one point it was a regular viable issue where if somebody would eat from it, he would get lashes. But if right now it's inei roy lachilas ger, there's a tremendous makar in the Rishonim and certainly in the Achronim and even Achronim to say that we're going to go lakula, even though the Nabida wrote a tshuva not that way, but at the end of the day, the Nabida's tshuva goes down as a little bit of a tamua diga tshuva, and therefore a lot of Achronim nem done 100% lahakam. But there's another nakuda that needs to be addressed as relates to this topic, much shorter, but very, very important and integral to this discussion, and that is the Rosh in Mesechtes Brachos, in Perek Ketzim Mevarchim, and this is in Siman Lamed Hey. He brings a psak from Rabbeinu Yoina. So talk about early Rishonim. He brings a psak from Rabbeinu Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina was discussing something called musk. So what exactly is musk? Musk was something that was a byproduct of a deer. If you look it up, the musk deer. It came from the blood of the deer, and it was processed to the point where it was, in some cases, used as a food ingredient. People would eat musk together with other food, and it was used as a fragrance as well. Ever hear the expression, a musky odor, right? Certain colognes have musky odors. This is where it comes from. It comes from the musk. But the point is that, and this was something that was very popularly used in the times of the Rishonim, and Rabbeinu Yoina sat down and he had to issue a psak. Is a Jew allowed to eat musk, or is he not allowed to eat musk? Now, woe be the tzad not, because the deer, the musk deer was a non-kosher deer, so at the end of the day, it comes from something that you're not allowed to eat, and if it comes from something you're not allowed to eat, it's not going to be okay. Said Rabbeinu Yoina, it's mutter. Mutter 100%, full stop. Mutter, he didn't say bal nefesh yachmer. He said it's 100% going to be mutter. And the reason he said because let's be honest, by the time the dam converts to musk, it has no shaykhis to musk. And then he uttered the immortal words that we've all heard in halacha. And that is panim chadashos ba'okan. It's not the same thing. It's a new metzias. It's a new cheftza. And if that's the case, who cares that once upon a time it was blood of a hersh? Right now, this second, it's a whole new thing. And this new thing, the Torah never answered. And Panim Chadash is Bo'kan, Ben Yoina was mechadish that there's a musig where a person can distance himself so much from his origin that he has no yichus anymore. He has no shaychus anymore. Literally, he's not connected. He has no relationship to where it is he came from anymore. There's such a mitzias. And musk was the example that Rabbeinu Yoina gave. But just to read one lashon Rabbeinu Yoina, he says, Hachanami, Afa Bisham Etchilo Hayadam, Aber Kivan de Yotzim Etayris Dam, Basar Hashta is Linon. I look at Afa Bisham Nice and Tam Lishvach Betavshal. Who cares? It's musk that's being nice and Tam Lishvach. It's not a cheftz of a Chayat Meya that's doing it. It's not Dam, right? Which wouldn't even matter if it's Tamei Atar. But the bottom line is, it has nothing to do with those in Yonim. And said Rabbeinu Yoina, this is something that 100% is going to be mutter. And then he brought a raya. Rabbeinu Yoina's raya was because Rabbeinu Yoina said that it's pasha to me that if you would have a chaticha of isser that would fall into dvash, being that the dvash would literally consume the isser to the point that the isser would become a piece of dvash, it's pasha to me that if somebody would want to go ahead and eat the dvash, you'd be able to eat it. I don't care what's in there. I don't even care about bittul. That thing is gone. It's not chatichas isser anymore. And if somebody would want to eat it. And said Rabbeinu Yoina, just like it's pasha if chatichas isser would fall into dvash, you'd be able to eat the dvash. So if you want to eat the musk, you could eat the musk. After the Rosh brings Rabbeinu Yoina, he just fears ice with a few words. And he says, V'nireh, Daha afilu rayasa tzricha raya. That's what he says. He said, Rabbeinu Yoina had a raya. What's his raya? Because if chatichas isser would fall into dvash. What kind of raya is that? I mean, who said that that's the case? So it says the Rosh, V'nireh daha afilu rayasa tzricha raya. If you take a look at the Pirush Madane Yontif, that was written by the Baal Tosfos Yontif over here on the Rosh. So the Madani Yontif says that I disagree. We know there's a cloud that when something happens it means that it has Minig Yisrael Torah, it has a real shayrish in halacha, and that's for sure Rabbeinu Yonah was coming from. So this idea that the Rosh machta vek the raya from Rabbeinu Yonah, it's not fair, because Yidden have always been makel in such an yonim, and if that's the case, I don't think the Rosh is right when he said Rabbeinu Yonah needed a raya, because Rabbeinu Yonah was coming from Ma'asim b'chol yoyim, ma'am adaber, and that is something that's very powerful when it comes to halacha, ayin sham. But the bottom line is, this is the psak, this is the chiddush of Rabbeinu Yonah. This Chiddush Rabbeinu Yonah was quoted by all the G'dayli HaPoskim. The Radvaz and the Tshuva, the Pri Chodesh Barichas, Beis Yosef in Erechaim Sim in Tov Samech Zayin, Hilchas Pesach, the Taz over there in Tov Samech Zayin. I saw Rabbi Avad Yosef and that Tshuva Abi Yomer says that even the Rosh and the Tshuva worked with this Rabbeinu Yonah. I mean, the Rosh never blatantly was chaylik with Rabbeinu Yonah. Even the Rosh himself worked with this. And the bottom line is, this is something that there's no question has Groisa places in halacha, and that is that there's a concept of panim chadashes bolkan. Now, just to clarify, how is this different than the first half of the shmuz? How's this different than Nebi Yehuda? Right, it's two completely different things. Nebi Yehuda is talking about where I have nevela, but it's the kind of nevela was getting sharan and mole. Nobody would eat it. It's not something that you would eat. So it's nevela, right? It's nevela. We're not debating whether it's nevela or not. But the question is, nevela, that's in a roy lachila. That's the machlokes Rav Shimon Rav Meir, and that's the whole debate. Do we pass like Rav Shimon? Do we pass like Rav Meir? This is something else. What we're saying is not nevela. It's not because it's not royal achila. That's a different sugya. This is much more than that. This is how Rav Meir would be moider too. Because over here what we're saying is it's panim chadashes bo kan mamish. That was the mitzias of the mas. That's what was going on over there. But either way, this is the chiddush Rabbeinu Yonah. All right. So for the next part, you have to be sitting. Ready? You're sitting or you're standing? Hopefully sitting. This Rabbeinu Yonah comes up in another place, la halacha. I mean, this is mamish mind-boggling. It really is. If you misplain it for a minute, it's mamish mind-boggling. So we know that once upon a time we had Shemen HaMishcha. We also know that once upon a time we had the Ketores, the Yud Aleph Samimoni Ketores. So what was inside the Shemen HaMishcha? So it's Psukim, it's in Parshas Kisisa, it's in Perek Lamed, it's Pasuk Chav Beis. Vayedaber Havaya El Moshe Leimar. Va'ato kach lecha b'samim roish, morderar chamesh meos, v'kinmoin besen machtzisa chamishem u'masayim, u'knei voisem chamishem u'masayim, v'kida chamesh meos b'shekel HaKodesh v'shemen zayis hen. So there were 5 ingredients in the Shemen HaMishcha. There was morderar, there was kinmon besem, there was knei boisem, there was kida, and then there was shemen zayis, and the Torah delineates exactly what the shiur mar of each. What exactly is mar? Mar durar means it's the durar type of mar. But what exactly is mar? Right? What is the cheftz of mar? The truth is, mar was also in the Ketores. It's one of the Yud Aleph Samimoni Ketores. Mar uktziyah shebay l'sner. Right? Mar was in the Shemen HaMishcha. It was also in the Ketores. So what exactly is mar? If you take a look at the Ramban in his Pirush al HaTorah on the parsha of Shemen HaMishcha, hiskimu ha'mefarshim, says the Ramban, v'harav Moshe michlol. And included in the Mefarshim is the Rambam himself. Ki hamor hu anikra musk. You want to know what it is? It's musk. Where's this Rambam? This Rambam is in Hilchis Klei HaMikdash. It's in Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. Hamor, says the Rambam, hu hadam hatzorur b'chaya shebahoydu, this Indian chaya, hayudu alakoil, shemispasmen by bnei adam b'chol makai. So you want to know what mar is? Mar is musk. Then the Ramban brings that Ibn Ezra quotes this pshat, and he asked a whole bunch of kashas. One of the kashas that he asked is, V'acherim amru, eich ikones b'ktoires u'b'shemen ha'kodesh dam chayet mei. How in the world are you taking musk that comes from an unkosher animal, and you're putting it into the shemen ha'kodesh, and you're putting it into the ktoires? What's going on over here? And the Ramban said, doesn't bother me so much. Gam zu eino kushya ki alachos ahu hanesaf b'miroi v'adam v'yazim men b'chaya ein by loitum of loimas. Ramban understood that the must didn't come from the actual dam. It came from a certain lechos, like some pus, and therefore it's not really part of the chaya. It's perish ba'alma, like we saw in the sugyas, and it's for that reason it's not included in the machalos asuras. Then is this kasha that Ibn Ezra asks on these shitas, the Ravid in his asagas asks on the Rambam. So again, the Rambam says, Hamor hu adam atzor b'chaya shebahoydu. Hayudu al kol shem espasmoy b'nei adam b'chol makom. Omer Avam zok the Ravid, ein daiti mikabeles. He says, my brain can't process this. Sheyachnisu b'maisa hektish dam shum chaya ba'olam loy kolshken chaya tmeya What in the world? So he says, I have a different pshat based on a pasuk Ashir and Barakeh, Basi Lagani, Achoisi Kalo Arisi, and he goes and he says the other pshat that the Ramban already brings in terms of what more is. But the Rambam and the way the Ramban expresses Skimu HaMefarshim. This is the Haskam of the Mefarshim. Even Ezra and Raivin notwithstanding. But this was the Hiskimu HaMefarshim. V'arav Ramoshim Michlolam. And the Ramban himself defends it. Mamish tooth and nail. That in the Shem and HaMishcha and the Ketores, there was this Indian of Musk. But everybody was matmir. What's going on over here? How could it be? And the Ramban tried wiggling out in terms of the Metzias. But if you take a look at the Kesef Mishnah, the Beis Yosef, in his Pirush right on the Rambam, says the Kesef Mishnah, this that the Ravid said, Ein daitoi mekabela sheyikonis b'maisa hakodesh dam shum chai v'kolshkin dam chai tmei yesh loimer shekivan shen nishtana mitzuras dam v'nase ko'afa ba'alma v'u boisim mariach reach tov b'yosa lama yigara. Who cares? Who cares from Vanitzer stammt? Right now, it was Megayer. It completely changed its nature. And if right now it smells good, and it was something that practically speaking was very convenient and seemed very geschmack and matim to put into the Shem and HaMishcha, to put into the Ketores, why should that be a big deal? What's the svar of the Kesef Mishnah? It's Rabbeinu Yoina. So this svar of Rabbeinu Yoina, Chevra, it goes so wide. It was in the Shem and HaMishcha, it was in the Ketores. You can't even say this out of your mouth almost. But it was in the Shem and HaMishcha, it was in the Ketores. And by the way, the Ravid says, I can't process this. And Even Ezra said the same thing. But the Rishonim defended it, and it boils down to Rabbeinu Yoina. In other words, there's this unbelievable chiddush in Rabbeinu Yoina, and that is that there's a musig in halacha of panim chadashis bokan. And I don't care where this thing came from. If right now it's panim chadashis, this is going to change everything. At this point, it's going to be completely different. So let's go back to where we started. It's getting late early. And that is, so we set this up, talking about the history of the kashrus of Coca-Cola, specifically glycerin, which is one of the ingredients, which is an animal byproduct. And then we talked a little bit about gelatin, which is very much me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa inyan, which is also an animal byproduct. One comes from the fats, the other comes from the collagen, which is the protein. But same difference. You have now parts of a non-kosher animal. And how is halacha supposed to treat this? Really, at first glance, and this is the first shear as it relates to understanding the sugi of gelatin a little bit, there would be two svaras to throw out there to debate, and both of them would be muscharishan, having it a das, where if you wanted to be makel, you would have very, very much what to be saimachan. The first is, there's no question in the world that the gelatin and the glycerin, basher husham, is not roy lachilas adam. And if it's not roy lachilas adam, Al zen nem ashitas Rab Shimon, that Echon knows that the halach is that once something's noise in Tam Lefkam, at that point it's going to be mutter. And even though it's machlokes Rab Shimon Rab Meir, and even though the Noid Yehuda with his grace of koyach paskin lechumra, that when it comes to this machlokes, halach is like Rab Meir, but gedolei achroinam ubesoichem the Shvus Yaakov, ubesoichem the Chida, the Marsham, Reb Chaim Moiser, they all said that it can't be that this Noid Yehuda is so pashut, because the Rav Magid already said that the Shittas HaRambam is to be maker like Rab Shimon, and the Rashba said him a furish, and the Rosh said him a furish. And not just that, there's so many rayas seemingly at first glance, ayin sham da arichas of Chacham Avadia, the loy kanoid behuda, and it's for that reason the halachic status of this glycerin and this gelatin, there would be starker makom lahakel just based on the fact that Parasher Usham it's not roy lachilas adam. But there's another reason to be mekel, and that is Rabbeinu Yoina. Let's say we're going to nemon the sheet of the Noid Yehuda. Let's say we're going to be machman that the halacha is like Rameh, because at the end of the day, kvar hoyre zaken, and who has the plates is right. You can't be mekel like the Noid Yehuda in all these places, and then all of a sudden now when he says a chumrah, I'm going to be mekel like some of the other achreinim. No, we live and die with the Noid Yehuda, and if that's the case, so if the Noid Yehuda said it's chamer, it's chamer. But on top of that, you have Rabbeinu Yoina. You have Rabbeinu Yoina, panim chadashis bokan. You're going to say, come on, you're going to take something that came from a chazer, chulilo, and you're going to put it into your pride, you're going to put it into your mouth. They put it on the mizbeach. It wasn't a chazer. It was a chayat. They put it on the mizbeach. And you're right. The Ravid said, ain't daiti mikabelis is it. I can't fathom it. I'm asking. I can't either fathom it. But at the end of the day, it's what the Rambam says. And it's what the Ramban says was his skimu kol ha-mefarshim. So at the end of the day, this was the Metzias. And there's a musik of panim chadashis bokan. There's a concept of bittul, right? The poskim say that if somebody doesn't want to rely on bittul, he's a koifer biker. Because kulam meroya echad nitnu, in the same Torah that says like soichlu nevela says achir rabba ma'atlis. There's a musik, there's a halachic concept called, there is such a mitzvah, there's a real thing called panum chadashis ba'okan. Right, in the Svar Makdoshim, the Indian of bittul is to be miled in its and to be able to play around with the clippers, because how else could you eat machal sasuras and maled in its it happens through bittul. So maybe this is the avoid over here. I'll pichsi this, the bnei soschas mayach in this kiddo. But the bottom line is two svaras to be made. Number one, noniach, I see it as a piece of nevela. Noniach, I see it as a piece of chazer. But it's in Eirei Lachilas Adam. It's in Eirei Lachilas Adam. It's going to be mutter. Number two, it could be the chemical processing of it. It physically alters it to such a level that we're at a point where it's 100% panim chadashis ba'okan. And being that it's panim chadashis ba'okan, I can't even view it anymore as being the Isser, and if that's the case, that too would be a svara to be makel. The bottom line is, two svaras ostensibly to be makel. Now again, we can't do Raid Bite Part 2 without doing Raid Bite Part 3, because if we walk away from here, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. So we're not stopping over here. This again is very much not halacha l'maisa. This is not the way the Gedolei Achronim came out. I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but this is not the way the Gedolei Achronim came out. But I just want to end with one little twist, and that is, I was going through this tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda about the shalfuchis of the Dag Tameh. And I just figured, I wonder what this fish even was, right? Al dvar hakruk, v'yesh koyernoisei hoizen balazen. Some people call it hoizen, or probably hausen balazen. So I looked it up, and I triangulated my information. I looked it up in multiple sources. You know what the hausen was? You ready? It was a sturgeon. That's what it was. The hausen was a sturgeon. Can you believe it? The bladder of the sturgeon. Rebaited al makula. So what's going on over here? It's a pella, right? So I remembered a few weeks ago, I got an email, and it came from someone who listens to the shir, who happens to be a very chashuv Talmid Chacham. He's a member of one of the big kashrus organizations in America. And he sent me an email very respectfully saying that we misspoke a little bit during the shir. Because if you remember, at the end of the sturgeon raid bite, I said, were it not for the fact that the Gedolim came out, not like the Chachmei Prague, not like the Noda B'Yehuda and Reb Shmuel Landau and Reb Elazar Flecklis, you'd be sitting at a Toyameh and you would say, pass the beluga caviar with the beluga vodka. So he wrote to me and he says, you have to be careful when you say something like that, because not all sturgeon was created equally. And even like the Noda B'Yehuda, the beluga caviar would still be not kosher. At the time, I didn't appreciate it, but I looked back up, I had a feeling this is where he was coming from. You know what his raya was? Take a look at Chuvas Noda B'Yehuda, Yoredei Madura Kamen Simcha Vav. Because if you look it up, this hausen wasn't just any sturgeon. It was the beluga sturgeon. This is where he was coming from. So at the end of the day, we got to be careful. But not all sturgeon was created equally, even if you're going to be Soymech on the Noda B'Yehuda. That's why we put out the disclaimer, you ask your local rabbi. But I just thought, in a twist of irony, this Noda B'Yehuda is talking about sturgeon. Now, I know what Tailam was going to say. Maybe this is a ride that Yehuda was chayzer, right? Because remember, that was the whole time that Yehuda was chayzer. But first, tshuva. Why is he writing about the shalfuchis of the bladder of the sturgeon? I thought the Yehuda holds its mutter. So maybe this is a raya that he was chayzer. But we know Reb Shmuel Landau, Reb Elazar Flecklis, the Vyotzlan Zeh, Yotzar to L'Sachik Boy. They didn't even want to hear it. It was, you talk about something she'in adas mekabelas. They couldn't hear this even for 1 second. The mahalach is because not all sturgeon, could it be that Yehuda didn't know it was a sturgeon? Who knows? Very fascinating, very interesting. But the bottom line is, this is a beluga sturgeon making its way into Coca-Cola together with gelatin. Ein große Tarivas, one big Sidus Achashverish. But here's the bottom line. This is only part 2. Be'ezer Hashem, tomorrow we are going to do a very important part 3.